There is an hour, late at night, when the last of the day's performances is finally over. All day you have been someone, the competent one, the reliable one, the one who is fine, who has it handled, who smiles at the right moments and says the expected things. And now the house is quiet and the lights are off and there is no one left to perform for. And in that quiet, something you have been holding all day quietly sets itself down. For a lot of people, this is the hour when a strange feeling arrives. Not quite loneliness, not quite fear, more like the sense that there is someone else here in the dark with you. Someone who has been waiting all day for the performance to end. Someone who knows the things you do not say out loud, who remembers what you have tried to forget, who feels what you have decided not to feel. A stranger, almost. And yet, a stranger who is somehow, unmistakably, you. If that feeling has ever found you here, in the dark, you are not doing anything wrong, and there is nothing broken in you. You are simply, for once, alone with the whole of yourself, without the mask you wear for the daylight. And tonight, gently and without any hurry, we are going to keep that stranger company, not to fix anything, not to solve anything, only to sit quietly with the parts of you that the day does not have room for, so that you can finally rest as one whole person, instead of lying awake, divided against yourself. We are going to keep company tonight with a man named Carl Jung. He was a Swiss psychiatrist, one who spent more than half a century listening carefully and without judgment to what people carried underneath their daylight selves. He believed that every one of us has a hidden side, a part we have pushed out of sight because it did not fit the person we were trying to be. He called it the shadow. And he believed, against everything our fear tells us, that this hidden self is not our enemy, that it holds not only what we are ashamed of, but also much of our lost strength, our buried aliveness, the pieces of ourselves we gave away too young, and that the great work of a life, especially in its second half, is not to defeat this hidden self, but to make peace with it, to become, at last, whole. That is a gentle and hopeful idea to carry into sleep, so let it settle in slowly. You are not two people at war. You are one person who has, understandably, kept part of himself in the dark. And tonight, the war can pause. There is nothing to defend here. There is no one to perform for. There is only the dark, and this voice, and the slow, kind work of letting the mask come off, and the whole of you finally rest. So let your shoulders come down from where they have been holding all day. Let the pillow take the full weight of your head. There is nothing to decide tonight, and nothing to finish. There is only this quiet, and the permission, at last, to be all of who you are, and to sleep. Chapter 2. The Stranger Who Lives Inside You. Jung noticed something in his long years of listening that most of us sense but rarely say out loud. He noticed that inside every person there seemed to live a second person. Not a literal one, of course, but a whole hidden self, made of everything the daylight self had decided not to be. and he found that this hidden self did not simply disappear because we ignored it. It went on living, down in the dark, with a life of its own. You may have met this stranger yourself, in small ways, without naming it. The flash of anger that surprised you, that seemed to come from someone you did not recognize. The desire you would never admit to. The pettiness, the envy, the longing. The part of you that wanted something entirely different from what you had chosen. Or, just as often, the opposite. A tenderness you were too guarded to show. A creativity you buried to be practical. A part of you that was braver, freer, more alive than the careful person you became. All of that, Jung said, does not vanish. It simply moves underground and waits. And here is the thing that matters for tonight. Jung believed that most of our inner unrest comes not from this hidden self, but from the effort of keeping it hidden. The stranger is not the problem. The exhausting, lifelong work of pretending the stranger is not there, that is the problem. It takes an enormous amount of quiet energy to keep a part of yourself locked out of sight, and we spend that energy every day without noticing until we lie down at night and feel suddenly how tired we are in a way that sleep alone does not seem to touch. So consider gently a different possibility tonight. What if the stranger inside you is not an intruder to be feared, but an exile to be welcomed home? What if the parts of yourself you have kept in the dark have been waiting not to harm you, but simply to be acknowledged, to be allowed back into the house of who you are? Jung found again and again that when a person finally turned toward the hidden self, gently and without panic, the dread dissolved. The stranger, met with kindness instead of fear, turned out to be far less frightening than the imagination had made it. It turned out, very often, to be the most alive part of them. You do not have to do any of that work tonight. Tonight, you only have to lie here and know that the stranger in the dark is not against you. It is you, a part of you that has been away too long, and there is nothing to fear in the quiet company of your own whole self. Let the stranger be here, in the room, unjudged. Feel how the tiredness eases the moment you stop pushing any part of yourself away, and let that ease carry you toward sleep. Chapter 3. A doctor who listened to dreams. Let me tell you a little about the man whose company we are keeping tonight. Carl Jung trained as a psychiatrist at the beginning of the last century, at a time when the mind was only beginning to be explored as a landscape with hidden depths. He worked, at first, alongside the pioneers of the new science of the unconscious, and for a while he was the closest colleague of the most famous of them. But over time, Jung came to see the human mind in his own way, a way that was larger, stranger, and in the end more hopeful. Where others saw the hidden mind mostly as a cellar of buried troubles, Jung came to see it as something closer to an ocean. Yes, there were dark and frightening things down there, but there were also treasures. There was wisdom the daylight mind knew nothing of. There were images and patterns that seemed to rise up from a place deeper than any one person's life. And there was, he believed, a quiet pull toward wholeness, a natural movement in every psyche toward becoming complete, if only we would stop fighting it. Jung listened to people in a particular way. He paid close attention to their dreams because he believed that in sleep, when the daylight self loosens its grip, the hidden self speaks. Not in plain sentences, but in images, in symbols, in strange little stories that seem to make no sense until you sit with them. He did not think dreams were nonsense to be dismissed, nor puzzles with a single fixed answer. He thought they were messages from the deeper self, trying, night after night, to restore a balance the waking mind had lost, to show us, gently, the parts of ourselves we were neglecting. There is something fitting in that for a night like this, because you are moving now toward the very state in which, Jung believed, the deeper self comes closest to the surface. Sleep is not just a switching off, it is a return to the larger mind, the part of you that is always working quietly to make you whole. You do not have to understand it. You do not have to interpret anything. You only have to trust that as you drift down into sleep, you are moving toward the part of yourself that has always been on your side, working even now to heal what the day has strained. So let the daylight mind, with all its arguments and its defenses, begin to loosen its hold. It has worked hard today. It can rest now. And underneath it, rising gently to meet you, is the deeper self, the ocean, patient and vast and kind, ready to receive you into sleep. You are in good and ancient hands. Rest. Chapter 4. The Two Selves You Carry. Jung came to believe that each of us lives, in a sense, as two selves, and that understanding this quietly explains a great deal of the tension we carry. There is the self we show, the one we have built carefully over the years to meet the world, to be accepted, to belong. And there is the self we keep, the one made of everything that did not fit the first. Neither is the whole truth of you. You are, in the end, both, and more than both. But we spend much of our lives identified only with the first and estranged from the second. And that estrangement is a quiet ache we learn to live with without ever quite naming it. Think of how early this begins. When you were very young, you learned, without being told directly, which parts of you were welcome and which were not, which feelings brought warmth and which brought coldness or trouble. And being a small creature who needed love to survive, you did the sensible thing. You brought forward the parts that were welcomed, and you quietly put away the parts that were not. This was not a failure. It was how you survived childhood. Every one of us did it. But the parts we put away did not cease to exist. They went into the dark and became the second self, the one we carry but rarely meet. And so we walk through our lives, most of us, slightly divided, presenting one self, carrying another. And it works, more or less, for a long time. But Jung noticed that at a certain point, often in the middle of life, the arrangement begins to strain. The self we built starts to feel too small, too tight, like a coat that fit a younger person. A restlessness sets in, a sense that something is missing, though we cannot say what. And what is missing, Jung believed, is usually the other self, the exiled one, the parts we put away so long ago that we have forgotten they were ever ours. This is worth holding gently in the dark, because it reframes a feeling you may know well, that vague sense, especially in the quiet hours, that something in your life is incomplete. It may not be a sign that you have chosen wrong or missed some opportunity out in the world. It may be something quieter and more inward. It may be the second self, the one you left in the dark, asking without words to be let back in, not to take over, only to be included, to be part of the whole again. You do not have to answer that call tonight. Tonight, you only have to notice kindly that you are more than the single self you present to the world, and that the fullness you sometimes ache for is not out there to be acquired, but in here, to be reclaimed. That is a gentle and hopeful thing to know as you fall asleep. You are not missing something. You are only slowly on your way back to something that was always yours. Rest in that wholeness, already quietly waiting. Sleep. Chapter 5. The persona. The face you show the world. Jung had a name for the self we present to the world. He called it the persona, borrowing the old word for the mask an actor wore on the ancient stage. The persona is the face we put on to meet others. It is the role we play, the version of ourselves shaped to fit our work, our family, our place among people. And Jung was clear that the persona is not a bad thing, it is necessary. We could not live in society without one. It is the handshake, the manners, the professional calm, the social self that lets us move among others without friction. We all need a mask. The trouble begins only when we forget that it is a mask and mistake it for the whole of who we are. Consider your own persona for a moment, gently, without judgment. There is the way you are at work, competent and measured. The way you are with your family, in whatever role you have long played there. The way you are with strangers, polite and contained. These faces are real in their way. They are not lies, but they are partial. They are the parts of you that the world has found useful and acceptable, arranged into a presentable whole. And behind every one of them there is more of you than the mask can show. The danger Jung warned about was a quiet one. It was the danger of the mask growing onto the face, of a person becoming so identified with their persona, so merged with the role, that they lose touch entirely with the fuller self beneath. This happens easily to responsible, capable people, the very people who are good at their roles. They perform so well for so long that they forget there was ever anyone behind the performance. And then one day, often in the still of the night, they feel a strange hollowness and cannot understand why a life that looks so complete from the outside feels, on the inside, like something is quietly missing. If any of that sounds familiar, let it be met tonight not with alarm, but with recognition. It is one of the most common and human of conditions. The very skills that let you succeed, the ability to be what each situation needs, can slowly wall you off from the part of you that is not performing at all. And the cure is not to throw away the mask, which you need. The cure is only to remember that you are not the mask. To keep a quiet inner knowledge that behind the competent, presentable self, there is a whole and living person, the one who is here now, in the dark, with the mask finally set down. So set it down now, fully. There is no one here to be presentable for, no role to play, no performance required by the dark. Just you, the whole of you, the one behind the mask, allowed at last to simply be and to rest. Feel how good it is to stop holding the face in place. Feel the relief of it, and let that relief become sleep. Chapter 6. When the mask grows heavy. There comes a point, for many people, when the mask grows heavy. It was light enough once. When we were younger, playing our roles felt natural, even exciting. We were becoming someone, building a self the world would respect, and there was energy in that. But roles that were once a good fit can slowly become a cage, and the self we built to belong can start to feel like a costume we cannot take off. And carrying it day after day begins to cost more than it gives. Jung paid special attention to this weariness because he saw it so often in the people who came to him in the middle of their lives. They were not, on the surface, in crisis. They had done what they were supposed to do. They had built the career, the family, the standing. And yet they arrived carrying a fatigue that sleep did not cure and success did not lift. What they were tired of, Jung came to understand, was not their lives exactly. It was the effort of maintaining a self that had grown too narrow for the person they had quietly become. The mask had stopped fitting, and holding it in place had become exhausting. If you have felt that particular tiredness, the kind that a good night's sleep does not quite reach, it may not be your body that is tired. It may be the part of you that has been holding the performance together for so many years. And there is, in Jung's view, a strange and hopeful message hidden inside that fatigue. It is not a sign that something is failing. It is a sign that something in you is ready to grow. The weariness with the old, tight self is the first stirring of the larger self, pressing gently against the walls of the role, asking for more room. It is uncomfortable, but it is the discomfort of something trying to be born, not something dying. So if the mask has grown heavy for you, hear that not as bad news, but as a beginning. It means you have outgrown a version of yourself, which is exactly what is supposed to happen as a life deepens. The tightness you feel is the old coat, not the body. And tonight at least, you can set the whole heavy thing down. You do not have to hold any version of yourself in place while you sleep. The performance is over for the day. The mask can rest on the table by the bed, and you can lie here as the fuller, quieter person underneath, needing to prove nothing, needing to maintain nothing. Feel how much lighter you become when you stop holding the mask up. All that quiet effort released. All that maintaining set down. There is nothing to keep in place tonight. There is only you, unmasked and at ease in the dark, growing, even now, toward something larger, while you rest, sleep. Chapter 7. The Shadow. What you refuse to be. Now we come to the heart of it, the idea that Jung is best remembered for, and we will approach it slowly and gently because it is nothing to be afraid of. Jung called it the shadow. The shadow is made of everything about yourself that you have refused over the years to be. All the traits, the feelings, the impulses that did not fit the person you were trying to become, and so were pushed down out of sight. The shadow is the sum of the disowned. It is the self you decided long ago not to be. Everyone has one. This is important to understand tonight, because the shadow is often imagined as something shameful, a private darkness that only you carry. But Jung was clear. There is no living person without a shadow. The brighter the light we try to stand in, the sharper the shadow we cast. The more carefully we build a good and acceptable self, the more we push into the dark everything that does not match it. The shadow is not a sign of a bad person. It is simply the necessary other half of a self that had to choose what to show and what to hide. To be a person at all is to cast a shadow. And what lives in the shadow is not only the things we would call bad. Yes, there is the anger we do not permit ourselves, the envy, the selfishness, the desires we judge. But Jung made a discovery that surprises people, and it is worth holding close. He found that the shadow also holds much that is good. For many people, especially those who learned early to be small, or quiet, or endlessly accommodating, the shadow holds their strength, their capacity to say no, their ambition, their passion, their anger at genuine wrongs, their refusal to be walked over. These too get pushed into the dark when a person decides that to be loved they must be only gentle, only agreeable, only good. And so the shadow is not simply the worst of us, it is the unlived of us, the whole unspent portion of a life. This is why Jung believed that facing the shadow, far from being a descent into darkness, is very often a recovery of lost life. When a person finally turns toward the disowned parts of themselves, they frequently find, mixed in with what they feared, exactly the vitality and strength they had been missing all along. The exiled parts come home carrying gifts. The anger becomes healthy boundaries. The buried desire becomes renewed aliveness. The refused strength becomes, at last, available. You do not have to go looking for any of this tonight. It is enough, for now, simply to know that the shadow is not a monster in the basement. It is the other half of you, holding both what you fear and much of what you have been missing, waiting without menace to be acknowledged. There is nothing down there that is not already you, and nothing that is already you needs to be feared in the dark. Let the shadow simply be, tonight, a part of the whole, and let the whole of you rest, sleep. Chapter 8. Why the shadow is not your enemy. It is natural when you first hear of the shadow, to want to be rid of it. To think that the good and healthy thing would be to root out the dark parts, to become all light, to finally defeat the hidden self once and for all. Jung understood this impulse, and he believed it was one of the most damaging mistakes a person could make, because the shadow cannot be defeated. It can only be denied, and what is denied does not disappear. It grows stronger in the dark, and it finds its way out sideways, in ways we do not choose and cannot control. Think of how this works. The person who refuses to admit they ever feel anger does not thereby become peaceful. The anger simply goes underground and comes out as coldness or bitterness or a sudden eruption that shocks everyone, including themselves. The person who cannot admit their own capacity for pettiness or cruelty is precisely the person who acts it out without noticing, all the while believing themselves entirely good. Jung observed with great care that the parts of ourselves we refuse to see are exactly the parts that end up running us. What we will not face controls us. What we deny directs us from below. And so the shadow, when it is pushed away and made an enemy, does indeed cause harm. But the harm comes from the denial, not from the shadow itself. This is the crucial turn in Jung's thinking, and it is a hopeful one. The shadow becomes dangerous only when it is exiled. Welcomed, acknowledged, brought into the light of awareness, it loses its compulsive power. The anger you can admit to is anger you can choose what to do with. The desire you can see clearly is a desire you can hold wisely. It is only the disowned that possesses us. The moment we stop making the shadow an enemy, it stops behaving like one. This is why Jung spoke not of conquering the shadow, but of befriending it, of turning toward the disowned self with the same patience and curiosity you might offer a frightened animal or a child who has been shut out in the cold. Not to indulge it, not to let it run wild, but to know it, to accept that it is part of you, and in that acceptance to take back the reins that denial had handed over. Wholeness, he believed, is not the victory of the light over the dark. It is the reconciliation of the two. It is becoming a person who contains both, and is therefore no longer at war within. So let go tonight of the long war against your own dark. It was never a war you could win, and it was costing you more than you knew. You do not have to be all light to be at peace. You only have to stop fighting yourself. Feel what it is to lay down that particular weapon, the one aimed inward, the one you have carried so long you forgot you were holding it. The shadow is not your enemy. It never was. It is only the part of you that was waiting to be allowed home. Let it come home tonight, quietly, and let the whole of you, reconciled at last, sink gently into sleep. Chapter 9. The Gold Hidden in the Dark. There is an old idea, older than Jung, that he was fond of, drawn from the strange world of the medieval alchemists. Those old seekers believed they could turn base metal into gold, and while they never managed it in their laboratories, Jung saw that they had stumbled onto a deep truth about the human soul. The gold, he understood, was not in the metal. It was in them. The real transformation was inward, and the raw material for it, the base and unpromising stuff from which the gold was made, was precisely the dark and rejected matter, the parts of the self that seemed worthless or shameful. The treasure, the old text said, lies in the place you least want to look. Jung took this to heart, and it became one of his most healing insights. The gold is in the shadow. The very parts of yourself you have judged and buried are, very often, where your unlived vitality is hidden. Consider the person who was told early on that they were too much, too loud, too intense, too emotional. They learned to shrink, to dim themselves, to be manageable. And into the shadow, along with the excess, went their fire, their passion, their capacity for joy and for depth. Decades later, they feel flat, muted, as though life is happening behind glass. And what they need is not out in the world, it is down in the shadow, where they long ago hid their own flame. Or consider the person who learned that anger was dangerous, that to be good was to never make trouble. They became endlessly accommodating, unable to refuse, quietly resentful without knowing why. And in their shadow lies their strength, their healthy no, their ability to stand their ground and protect what matters. The gold they need is exactly the thing they were most afraid of. This is the pattern Jung saw again and again. What we bury is not only our worst, it is our power, our aliveness, the disowned capacities that would make us whole. There is deep encouragement in this, especially in the quiet hours when we are inclined to judge ourselves. The parts of you that you have been ashamed of, the traits you have worked hardest to hide, may not be flaws to be eliminated at all. They may be gold, buried in the dark, waiting to be reclaimed and put to good use. The intensity you were told was too much. The sensitivity you learned to hide. The desire, the ambition, the anger at real wrongs. These are not the refuse of your character. They may be its richest ore. You do not have to go mining tonight. It is enough, as you drift towards sleep, to let a gentler thought replace the old harsh one. That the parts of you that you have kept in the dark are not simply your shame, that somewhere down there, mixed in with what you feared, is gold, your own gold, the lost brightness of a life. And that it is not gone, it is only waiting. There is nothing to do about it now but rest, and let the quiet knowledge warm you. The treasure was never lost. It was only kept in the one place you were afraid to look. Sleep now, and let it keep safely until you are ready. Chapter 10. What you see in others that you cannot stand. Jung made an observation about human nature that, once you understand it, changes the way you see a great deal of your own irritation, and it is worth turning over slowly in the calm of the night. He noticed that the traits we most cannot stand in other people are very often the very traits we have refused to see in ourselves. The shadow, denied a place in our own self-image, does not simply vanish. It gets cast outward onto others. We see it out there, in them, and we react to it with a heat far greater than the situation seems to warrant. Jung called this projection. Consider how it works, gently and without self-blame, because we all do it. There is a particular kind of person who irritates you beyond all reason. Not a mild dislike, but a strong, almost personal aversion. Perhaps it is the person who is always seeking attention, or the one who is arrogant, or selfish, or needy, or cold. And the intensity of your reaction is the clue. A trait that has nothing to do with us, we can observe with mild indifference. But a trait that lives in our own shadow, unacknowledged, we cannot bear to see in another, because it stirs, without our knowing, the thing we have worked so hard to keep buried in ourselves. This is not to say that other people never have real faults, or that every irritation is a projection. That would be too simple. But Jung's insight offers a quiet and useful mirror. When you find yourself reacting to someone with a heat that seems out of proportion, with a judgment that feels strangely urgent, it is worth asking, softly and without accusation, whether the thing you are seeing in them might also live, in some form, in you. The attention seeker may stir the part of you that longs secretly to be seen. The arrogant one may stir the confidence you never let yourself have. Very often, what we cannot stand out there is a letter addressed to us about ourselves. There is something freeing in this, rather than shaming, if you take it gently. Because it means that our strongest irritations are not just burdens, they are information. They are the shadow, making itself visible in the only way it can, by showing us, in the mirror of another person, the parts of ourselves we have not yet met. Every intense aversion is a small, unopened message from the hidden self. And to begin to read those messages kindly is to begin the very work of becoming whole. You do not have to read any of them tonight. It is enough to let the idea rest in you, softening the old habit of judgment, both of others and of yourself. The people who irritate you are not simply your enemies. Some of them are your teachers, showing you, without meaning to, the parts of yourself still waiting in the dark. And that turns even irritation into something that can, in time, be used for peace. But not tonight. Tonight, let all of it go, the others and their faults, yourself and yours. There is no one to judge in the dark, not even you. Rest. Chapter 11. The Mirror of Irritation. Let us stay a little longer with this gentle mirror, because there is real rest to be found in it once the sting goes out. So much of the tension we carry through a day is the tension of judgment, the low, constant hum of finding fault with the people around us and, underneath that, with ourselves. And Jung's insight about projection offers a way to set that hum down, not by trying harder to be tolerant, but by understanding where the heat actually comes from. When you understand that your sharpest judgments of others are often reflections of your own disowned parts, something softens. The judgment loses its righteousness. You begin to see that the person who irritates you is not so much your opposite as your mirror. They are living out, openly, something you have kept hidden. And whether that something is a fault or a buried strength, The recognition brings a strange compassion, both for them and for yourself. We are, all of us, carrying shadows. We are all, in one way or another, exiling parts of ourselves and then meeting those parts uneasily in each other. The whole human comedy of judgment is really a room full of people seeing their own hidden faces in one another and flinching. Jung believed that as a person did the slow work of coming to know their own shadow, this constant outward judgment quieted on its own. Not through force of will, not through gritted teeth tolerance, but naturally, because there was less and less inside that had to be denied and cast outward. The person who has made peace with their own capacity for anger no longer needs to be scandalized by it in others. The person who has acknowledged their own ordinary selfishness can meet another's selfishness with understanding rather than outrage. As the inner exile ends, the outer war ends too. Peace inside becomes peace toward others, almost without effort. This is a quietly beautiful idea to carry towards sleep. It means that the path to a more peaceful life among people does not run mainly through other people at all. It runs through your own relationship with yourself. Make peace with the whole of who you are, the light and the dark, and you will find, almost as a side effect, that the world grows less irritating. Not because others have changed, but because you no longer need them to carry your shadow for you. You have taken it back, and in taking it back, you have set both yourself and them free. But none of that is required tonight. Tonight, there is no one to judge and nothing to forgive, not even in yourself. The mirror can be set down along with everything else. Let the low hum of fault-finding go quiet. Let every person you found difficult today simply be out there in their own lives, no longer your concern. And let yourself be in here, in the dark, no longer under judgment, not even your own. That quiet, that ceasefire, that is the doorway to sleep. Step through it. Now, rest. Chapter 12. Taking back what you threw away. There is a gentle work at the center of Jung's whole vision, and he sometimes described it as taking back what we have thrown away. Over a lifetime, we cast off pieces of ourselves. We throw away the traits that got us into trouble, the feelings that were not welcomed, the parts that did not fit, and we project others outward onto the people around us. We become, without meaning to, smaller than we are, a partial self surrounded by disowned fragments. And the work of the second half of life, Jung believed, is largely a work of gathering, of reaching back out into the dark and into the world and taking back the pieces of ourselves we scattered. This is not a violent or effortful thing. It is more like a slow homecoming. One by one, over time, we recognize the exiled parts and welcome them back. We admit finally that we do feel the anger we always denied, and in admitting it, we can hold it wisely instead of being ambushed by it. We reclaim the tenderness we hid to seem strong and find that it makes us more human, not less. We take back the ambition, the desire, the strength, the sensitivity, all the pieces we gave away to be acceptable, and we find that we become, at last, more fully ourselves, larger, rounder, more real. Jung believed this gathering was the natural direction of a healthy life, especially as we age. The first half of life is spent building the persona, establishing ourselves in the world, becoming someone. That is right and necessary. But the second half, he thought, has a different task. It is spent recovering everything the building left out, turning inward, reclaiming the shadow, becoming whole rather than merely successful. And he saw that people who refused this turn, who tried to keep building the outer self long past its season, grew brittle and hollow, while those who accepted it, who did the quiet inner gathering, grew deep and calm and strangely young in spirit, even as their bodies aged. There is great hope in this for anyone in the middle or later stretch of life, lying awake and wondering whether the best of things is behind them. Jung's answer is a resounding no. The most important work, he believed, comes later. The gathering of the self, the reconciliation with the shadow, the slow becoming whole, these are the tasks of maturity, and they yield a richness that the striving of youth never can. What feels, in the quiet hours, like decline, may in fact be the beginning of the deepest and most meaningful chapter of all. You do not have to gather anything tonight. The reclaiming is slow work, done gently over years, and none of it is due now. Tonight you only have to rest in the knowledge that nothing you have thrown away is truly lost. It is all still yours, waiting patiently to be taken back when you are ready. You are not diminished. You are only scattered and slowly, in your own time, coming home to yourself. Rest in that homecoming, already quietly underway. Sleep. Chapter 13. The Danger of the Unlived Shadow. Jung was gentle, but he was also honest, and he did not pretend that ignoring the shadow was without cost. So let us look calmly and without fear at what he saw happen when the shadow is left entirely in the dark, not to frighten ourselves, but to understand why the gentle work of facing it matters. Jung observed that the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge do not lie quiet. They press for expression. And if we will not give them a conscious, chosen place in our lives, they take an unconscious, unchosen one. The unlived shadow lives us, instead of us living it. He saw this in many forms. In the endlessly self-sacrificing person whose buried resentment leaked out as martyrdom and quiet control. In the rigidly upright person whose denied desires erupted in ways that shocked everyone. In the one who could not admit their own aggression, and so was forever the innocent victim of conflicts they had, without knowing, helped to create. In each case, the pattern was the same. The denied trait did not disappear. It operated from below, shaping the person's life in exactly the ways they most wished to avoid, precisely because they would not look at it. What we refuse to carry consciously, we are carried by unconsciously. But notice the hopeful shape hidden inside this hard truth. The problem, in every case, is not the trait. It is the denial, the anger, the desire, the aggression, the neediness. These are not in themselves destructive. Held in awareness, acknowledged and integrated, they become simply part of a full human being, available to be used well. It is only in the dark of denial that they turn compulsive and harmful, which means the remedy is not more suppression, which only deepens the danger, but the opposite, gentle acknowledgement, turning toward the exiled parts and saying quietly, "Yes, this too is me." That simple turning is what disarms the shadow. So the danger Jung warned of is real, but it points toward relief, not dread. It means that the way to be less driven by your hidden self is not to push it further down, which never works, but to let it carefully into the light of your own awareness. To stop pretending you are only ever kind, only ever calm, only ever good, and to make room, honestly, for the whole of what you are. Paradoxically, the person who admits their darkness is far less controlled by it than the person who insists they have none. Self-knowledge, even uncomfortable self-knowledge, is freedom. None of this is tonight's work. Tonight is for rest, not for reckoning. But let the reassurance underneath it settle over you. You do not have to be perfect to be at peace. In fact, the striving to be perfect, to be all light, is exactly what gives the shadow its hidden power. You can lay that striving down. You can let yourself be a whole and ordinary human being, containing everything a human contains. And in that honest wholeness, there is a deep and durable calm. Let the striving go tonight. There is nothing to perfect before you sleep. There is only the whole of you, allowed to be real and to rest. Sleep. Chapter 14. The person you pretend not to be. Every one of us maintains, quietly, a story about the kind of person we are. I am kind. I am patient. I am generous. I am strong. And these stories are not lies, exactly. They are usually true, as far as they go. But Jung noticed that we hold them a little too tightly, and that the tightness itself is a sign. Because underneath every insistence that I am always this, there is usually a hidden and sometimes I am the opposite, and that opposite is precisely what we pretend not to be. The person who insists always on their own patience is often the one most quietly seething. The one who is sure they are endlessly generous may be the one who keeps, in a hidden ledger, careful account of what they are owed. The one who is certain of their own kindness may be blind to the small cruelties they commit in its name. This is not hypocrisy in the ugly sense, a deliberate deception. It is something more human and more forgivable. It is the natural result of building a self-image and then having to exile everything that contradicts it. The more fixed our idea of who we are, the larger the shadow of who we pretend not to be. Jung's gentle suggestion was not that we are secretly awful beneath our decent self-images. It was subtler and kinder than that. It was that we are more than our self-images, that the truth of a person is always larger, more mixed, more contradictory than the tidy story they tell about themselves, and that there is a great relief, a great coming home in loosening our grip on the story and allowing the whole of ourselves to be true at once. I am kind, and sometimes I am not. I am strong, and sometimes I am frightened. I am generous, and sometimes I am selfish. Holding both is not a fall from grace. It is the beginning of honesty and of wholeness. There is a quiet freedom in this that is perfect for the end of a day. So much of our tiredness is the effort of maintaining the story, of being always and only the acceptable version, of never letting the contradicting parts show even to ourselves. And here, in the dark, with no one watching, you can let the story rest. You can be, for these hours, the whole contradictory truth of a human being without having to resolve it or justify it or tidy it up. You can be kind and tired and generous and depleted and strong and afraid all at once, because that is what a real person actually is. Let the tight story loosen now. You do not have to be the polished version of yourself to fall asleep. In fact, you can only truly rest when you stop holding that version in place. So let the person you pretend to be and the person you pretend not to be lie down together tonight as the single whole person you actually are. There is nothing to reconcile before morning. There is only the whole of you, allowed to be real in the dark and to rest. Sleep. Chapter 15. Meeting the shadow without fear. How does a person actually meet their shadow? Not in some dramatic confrontation, Jung believed, but in small, quiet, ordinary moments of honesty, met with a particular attitude, an attitude of curiosity rather than judgment. The shadow cannot be met by attacking it, nor by wallowing in it, but only by turning toward it with the calm, interested gaze you might offer something you genuinely wish to understand. Not to condemn, not to indulge, simply to see and to accept that what you are seeing is a real part of you. Jung found that this meeting was far less terrible than people feared. We imagine that if we truly looked at our hidden selves, we would be overwhelmed, that the darkness would swallow us. But in practice, the opposite tends to happen. What we have kept in the dark grows monstrous in our imagination precisely because we never look at it. Brought into the light of honest attention, held with a little kindness, it shrinks to its actual human size. The envy we finally admit turns out to be ordinary and manageable. The anger we finally face turns out to be information about something that matters to us. The desire we finally acknowledge turns out to be simply part of being alive. The monster, seen clearly, is almost always just an exiled and frightened part of ourselves. The key, Jung insisted, was the attitude. The shadow cannot be met with hatred because hatred only drives it deeper. It cannot be met with fear because fear makes it loom larger. It can only be met with a kind of steady, accepting acknowledgement. Yes, this too is me. This anger, this envy, this need. This is part of what I am, and I do not have to be destroyed by it, nor do I have to act on it. I only have to know it and hold it and let it take its place among all the other things I am. That steady acknowledgement is what transforms the shadow from a haunting into a homecoming. And here is the deep reassurance for the dark hours. You do not have to be afraid of yourself. Whatever is in you, however long you have kept it hidden, it is only human, and it is only yours, and it cannot hurt you simply by being seen. The things we fear about ourselves lose their power the moment we stop fleeing them. To turn and face your own depths gently is not to fall into darkness. It is to discover that the darkness was never as deep or as dangerous as your avoidance made it seem. You do not have to turn and face anything tonight. Tonight you only have to rest in the knowledge that there is nothing in you that needs to be feared, and nothing that would not soften if it were simply, kindly seen. You are safe with yourself. The whole of you is safe in the dark, held in a quiet acceptance that asks nothing and condemns nothing. Let that safety hold you. There is no monster here. There is only you, whole and human and tired, ready at last to rest, sleep. Chapter 16. The Unconscious. The vast sea beneath. We have spoken of the shadow, which is the nearest part of the hidden self, the part that borders our daylight awareness. But Jung believed the hidden mind went far deeper than the shadow, down and down into a vastness he called the unconscious. And his picture of it is a peaceful one to rest in as we move towards sleep. He imagined the conscious mind, the part of us we know and call I, as a small, lit island. And around it, in every direction, stretching down into unfathomable depths, the great dark sea of the unconscious, out of which the island rose and by which it is always surrounded. Most of what happens in us, Jung believed, happens in that sea, below the surface of our awareness. Our conscious thoughts are only the visible ripples on top of vast currents we never directly see. The sudden mood we cannot explain, the image that floats up unbidden, the dream that visits in the night, the intuition that turns out to be right for reasons we could not have named, all of these rise from the deep water. The little island of the conscious self likes to believe it is in charge, but it floats, always, on a sea far larger than itself, and it is that sea, in the end, that sustains it. Now, the conscious mind often fears the unconscious, the way a swimmer fears the deep and dark water beneath. But Jung came to see the depths not as a threat, but as a source. The unconscious was not merely a basement of repressed troubles. It was the wellspring of creativity, of renewal, of images and meanings richer than the conscious mind could ever manufacture. It was where the dream came from, and the sudden insight, and the slow healing that happens in us without our doing anything. It was, above all, the home of the deeper wisdom that is always, quietly, working to make us whole. The sea is not our enemy. It is the ground of our being. And sleep, Jung understood, is the nightly return to that sea. Every night, the little island of the conscious self loosens its grip and slips down into the great water from which it came. This is not a loss. It is a restoration. In sleep, we are returned to the larger mind, the deeper self, the vast and patient sea that holds us and renews us and works on our behalf while the daylight self rests. You do not have to fear the descent. You have made it every night of your life and every morning the island has risen again, refreshed by its time in the deep. So let yourself begin that descent now, without fear. Feel the small, tired island of your daylight self, with all its arguments and its efforts, begin to loosen, begin to sink, begin to be received by the great calm sea beneath. You do not have to hold the island up tonight. You do not have to stay on the bright and effortful surface. You can let go and sink gently into the vast and kindly deep that has always held you. It knows the way. It has always known the way. Let it take you down softly into sleep. Rest now on the great sea. It has you. Chapter 17. The deeper water we share. Jung made a discovery, or perhaps a proposal, that set him apart from the thinkers of his time, and it is one of the most consoling of all his ideas to hold in the dark. He came to believe that beneath the personal unconscious, the private sea of our own forgotten memories and hidden traits, there lay a still deeper layer, one we do not own alone, but share with all of humanity. He called it the collective unconscious. Beneath your own depths, he suggested, lie depths that are not only yours, a common ground on which every human mind is built, the inherited soul of the whole species. His evidence was strange and striking. He noticed that people, in their dreams and their imaginings, produced images and figures they could not have learned, images that appeared again and again across cultures separated by oceans and centuries. The same symbols surfaced in the dreams of a modern city dweller and in the myths of ancient peoples who could never have influenced them. It was as if, beneath the personal mind, there was a shared reservoir of human imagery, a common inheritance of the patterns by which human beings have always made sense of life, love, death, and meaning. We are not, at the deepest level, as separate as we feel. This is a profoundly comforting idea for the lonely hours of the night. Because so much of our suffering carries an extra weight, the weight of feeling utterly alone in it, cut off, unique in our struggle. And Jung's vision says otherwise. At the deepest level of the mind, you are connected to every human being who has ever lived. The images that rise in your dreams are cousins of the images that rose in the dreams of your distant ancestors. The great human experiences you are passing through have been passed through by countless others, and the patterns for meeting them are laid down in you, part of your inheritance, older than your own life. You are held not only by your own depths, but by the depths of all humanity. There is a kind of belonging in this that reaches deeper than any social belonging. You belong at the root to the whole human family, past and present, joined at the base of the mind to everyone who has ever loved, feared, hoped, and slept. When you lie awake with the great questions, you are not alone with them. You are one of billions, drawing on a common well far older than any of us. The loneliness of the surface self is real, but it is not the final truth. Beneath it runs the deeper water we all share. Let that shared depth hold you tonight. Feel yourself connected below the level of your solitary daylight self to the whole long human story To everyone who has ever lain down in the dark as you are lying now, and drawn on the same ancient wisdom, and been carried by the same deep sea. You are not a single, isolated island, after all. You are part of one vast, connected ocean of being, and it is holding you, along with everyone else, gently in the dark. Rest in that belonging. You have never truly been alone. Sleep. Chapter 18. The ancient patterns inside us. Within that shared deep water, Jung believed there live certain great patterns, ancient and universal, that shape the way human beings experience their lives. He called them archetypes. They are not specific images so much as tendencies, deep grooves in the human soul, ready-made forms into which our experiences flow. The pattern of the wise old teacher. The pattern of the nurturing mother and the great mother. The pattern of the hero who must venture into the dark and return changed. The pattern of the shadow itself. These patterns, Jung thought, are as much a part of our inheritance as the shape of our hands. We meet these patterns everywhere. Once we know to look, they are the recurring figures of the world's myths and fairy tales, which is why those old stories told by peoples who never met resemble one another so closely, and why they still move us so deeply though the worlds that made them are gone. The hero's journey, the descent into the underworld and the return, the wise guide who appears at the crossroads, the confrontation with the monster who turns out to guard a treasure. These are not just old tales. They are maps of the human soul, drawn again and again because the territory is always the same. And your own life, Jung believed, is quietly shaped by these same patterns, whether you notice or not. The passages you move through, the crises and the turnings, the descents into difficulty and the slow returns, these follow ancient forms. You are, in your own ordinary life, living out patterns as old as humanity. Your struggles are not random or meaningless. They are chapters in a story the human soul has always told, and there is comfort in recognizing the shape of it, in knowing that the dark passage you may be in has been mapped by countless travelers before you, and that the maps show again and again that the descent is followed by a return. This is why Jung thought the old myths and symbols were not childish things to be outgrown, but a kind of wisdom we have carelessly discarded to our cost. They carry, in the form of story, the accumulated understanding of how a human being moves through the great passages of a life. And when we lose touch with them, we lose touch with a guidance older and deeper than anything the reasoning mind can provide, a guidance built into the very structure of the soul. You do not need to study any of this tonight. It is enough to feel, as you drift, that your life is not a random accident, but part of an ancient and meaningful pattern, that whatever passage you are in has been traveled before, and that the deep structure of the human soul which you carry within you knows the way through. You are not making it up alone in the dark. You are being carried along a path worn smooth by everyone who came before. Trust the path. Trust the ancient pattern that is holding your life in shape even now, and let it carry you, tonight, gently down into sleep. Chapter 19. The Messages That Come at Night. Of all the ways the deeper self speaks to us, Jung believed the most important was the dream. Every night, when the daylight mind releases its grip, the unconscious sends up its images, its little stories, its strange and vivid scenes. And Jung was convinced that these were not meaningless static, not the random misfirings of a resting brain, but genuine communications from the deeper self, working, night after night, to tell the waking self what it had overlooked, and to restore a wholeness the day had disturbed. He noticed that dreams often seem to compensate for the one-sidedness of our waking lives. The person who was too rigidly controlled by day might dream of wildness and abandon. The person who thought too highly of themselves might dream of humbling scenes. The person neglecting some important part of their life might dream again and again of that very thing in disguised and insistent forms. It was as if the deeper self were a kind of inner physician, always working to bring the psyche back into balance, using the language of image and symbol because that is the native tongue of the depths, older and truer than words. Jung did not believe dreams could be decoded by a fixed dictionary, as though a certain image always meant a certain thing. He thought that was far too crude. Each dream, he believed, spoke in the personal symbols of the dreamer and had to be approached with humility and patience, as you would approach a message from someone wiser than yourself in a language you were only beginning to learn. The point was not to solve the dream like a puzzle, but to sit with it, to let it work on you, to let its images resonate and reveal, slowly, what part of you was asking to be heard. There is something deeply reassuring in this vision, especially at the threshold of sleep. It means that even now, as you drift toward the dreaming state, a part of you is at work on your behalf. A deeper, wiser self is preparing, in its own symbolic language, to tell you what you need, to restore what the day unbalanced, to guide you gently back toward wholeness. You do not have to do anything to earn this. It happens on its own, every night, whether you remember the dreams or not. The inner physician does its quiet work in the dark, asking nothing of you but that you sleep. So you can let go tonight into the dreaming with a kind of trust. Whatever comes, it comes from a part of you that is on your side, working toward your wholeness. You do not have to understand it or even remember it. You only have to let yourself descend into it, trusting that the deeper self knows what it is doing, and that the night, with all its images, is not a threat, but a healing. Let yourself sink toward the dreams now, unafraid, carried by the wise physician within, who has tended you every night of your life and will tend you again tonight. Rest, and let the deeper self do its gentle work. Sleep. Chapter 20. Listening instead of interpreting. There is a lesson in Jung's approach to the inner life that reaches far beyond dreams, and it is a restful one to carry into the night. It is the difference between listening and interpreting, between receiving and controlling. The daylight mind, so useful in the world, has a habit it cannot easily set down, the habit of seizing everything and turning it into a problem to be solved, a code to be cracked, a thing to be mastered. And Jung understood that some of the most important things in us cannot be mastered that way. They can only be listened to. When a difficult feeling arises, the reasoning mind rushes to explain it, to justify it, to argue with it, to make it go away. When an image or a longing surfaces from the depths, the mind wants to pin it down, to file it, to decide what it means and be done with it. But Jung found that this grasping approach often kills the very thing it grabs. The deeper self does not yield its wisdom to force. It reveals itself only to patience, only to a quiet, receptive attention that is willing to sit with something without immediately understanding it, to let it be present and unfold in its own time. Listening, not interpreting. Holding, not solving. This is a hard discipline for capable, active people, the very people who have succeeded by solving and controlling. And yet, Jung believed it was essential to any real inner growth and to any real peace. Some things in us are not problems to be fixed, but presences to be lived with. Some questions are not meant to be answered, but to be held, until, in their own time, they quietly resolve or reveal what they came to show. The willingness to not know, to sit in the presence of something unresolved without panic, is itself a kind of maturity and a kind of rest. And there is no better time to practice this gentle listening than now, at the edge of sleep. Because sleep itself is an act of letting go, of ceasing to grasp and control, of allowing yourself to be received rather than achieving anything. All day the mind has been solving, deciding, managing. And now it can stop. It can set down the endless work of interpretation. It can simply listen to the quiet and receive the dark and let itself be carried without needing to understand where. So let the grasping mind rest tonight. Whatever is unresolved, let it be unresolved for now. Whatever you have not figured out, let it remain unfigured. You do not have to solve anything before you sleep, and the trying only keeps you awake. Practice instead the deeper art, the art of listening, of holding, of letting be. Let the questions rest in the room, unanswered and harmless. Let yourself be received by the night rather than mastering it. There is nothing to interpret in the dark. There is only the quiet to be listened to and the sleep to be received. Let it come. Rest. Chapter 21. The complex. The sore spot you protect. Jung, early in his work, studied something he called complexes, and understanding them gently can bring a great deal of self-compassion in the quiet hours. A complex, in his sense, is a cluster of feelings, memories, and reactions that has gathered over time around some old wound or unmet need, and that carries a strong emotional charge. We all have them. They are the sore spots in the psyche, the places where an old hurt still lives, ready to be touched. And when something in the present presses on one of these sore spots, we react far more strongly than the present situation alone would explain. You know the experience, even if you have never had the word for it. Something small happens, a tone of voice, a certain kind of criticism, a particular slight, and suddenly you are flooded, gripped by a feeling far larger than the trigger. In that moment, Jung would say, a complex has been touched. The old wound, still alive beneath the surface, has been pressed, and all the stored feeling around it comes rushing up. It can feel, in those moments, as though you are not quite yourself, as though something older and more raw has taken the wheel. And in a sense, that is exactly what has happened. Jung's insight here is deeply humanizing. It means that our disproportionate reactions, the moments when we surprise ourselves with the intensity of our feeling, are not signs of weakness or madness. They are the ache of old wounds, still present, still asking for care. The person who overreacts to being ignored may carry an old complex around, not being seen, formed long ago, in childhood perhaps, when being seen was a matter of survival. The person who cannot bear a certain kind of criticism may be protecting a tender place that was wounded before they had any defenses at all. Underneath the outsized reaction is not a character flaw, but a hurt that never fully healed. And to understand this is to be able to meet ourselves and others with far more gentleness. When you feel yourself flooded by a reaction that seems too big, you can learn, over time, to pause and wonder kindly what old sore spot has just been touched. What young and wounded part of you is asking, in the only way it knows, for care. Not to indulge it, not to be ruled by it, but to hold it with compassion, the way you would hold a child in pain. The complex loses its grip not when we fight it, but when we finally tend the wound it grew around. You do not have to tend any wounds tonight. Tonight, you only have to know with kindness that if you carry sore spots, tender places, old hurts that still flare, this does not make you broken. It makes you human, and it makes you someone who has lived and been marked by living, as everyone is. There is nothing to fix in the dark. There is only the whole of you, wounds and all, worthy of the same gentleness you would offer anyone you loved. Offer yourself that gentleness now. Let the old sore spots rest, untouched and cared for, and let yourself sleep, rest. Chapter 22. When an old wound runs the show. Let us stay gently with this idea of the old wound, because Jung believed that much of the trouble in our lives and in our relationships comes from these hidden hurts operating from below, unseen. When a complex is strong and unacknowledged, it does not just cause the occasional flare, it can quietly shape the whole pattern of a life, steering our choices, coloring our perceptions, drawing us again and again into the same painful situations, all without our conscious knowledge. The old wound, unhealed, runs the show from behind the curtain. Consider how someone might, without ever intending to, keep recreating the very hurt they most want to escape. The person wounded early by abandonment may, out of that old fear, cling so tightly that they drive others away, and so relive the abandonment again and again, never seeing their own hand in it. The person who was made to feel never good enough may spend a lifetime chasing an approval that no achievement can ever satisfy, because the wound is not really about the achievement at all. Jung saw that until these old patterns are brought into the light, they repeat. What is unconscious, he said, is lived as fate, experienced as something happening to us, rather than something arising, in part, from within. But here, as always in Jung, the hard truth opens onto hope. Because the moment the old wound is seen, its grip begins to loosen. What is made conscious no longer has to be blindly repeated. The person who finally recognizes their pattern of clinging can begin, slowly, to choose differently. The one who sees at last that no amount of achievement will heal the wound of not enough can begin to tend the actual wound instead, and to find the enoughness they were chasing in the wrong place. To see the pattern is to begin to be freed from it. Awareness is the beginning of the end of fate. This is why the inner work Jung valued was never mere self-indulgence, never navel-gazing for its own sake. It was liberation. To come to know the old wounds we carry and the patterns they create is to stop being unconsciously ruled by them and to begin, at last, to live more freely, to make genuine choices rather than blind repetitions. The examined depths are not a trap, but a door, and it is never too late to walk through it. Jung saw people in the latter half of their lives finally recognize and release patterns they had lived out for decades, and find, even then, a new freedom. But none of that reckoning is for tonight. Tonight, the old wounds can simply rest, unpoked, unexamined, held in the dark with kindness rather than analysis. You do not have to understand your patterns to fall asleep. You do not have to heal anything before morning. You only have to let the whole of yourself, including the old hurts, lie down in peace, knowing that they are not your fault, that they can, in time, be seen and softened, and that tonight, at least, nothing is asking to be fixed. Let it all rest. Let yourself rest. Sleep, Chapter 23. The Inner Opposite. Jung believed that within each of us there lives an inner opposite, a hidden counterpart to our outward self, carrying the qualities we have not developed, the side of our nature we left unlived. In a man who has cultivated the hard, outward, striving qualities, there lives, hidden, a softer, more feeling, more receptive inner figure. In a woman who has lived through her gentler, relational side, there may live a hidden figure of strength, assertion, and independent will. Jung gave these inner opposites particular names, but the deep point beneath the names is universal, and it is this. Each of us is more than the half of our nature we chose to live. Within us waits the other half, our own missing counterpart. This inner opposite, Jung found, tends to remain unconscious, and because it is unconscious, it too gets projected outward most powerfully onto the people we are drawn to. The qualities we have not developed in ourselves, we often seek, with great longing, in others. We fall for the person who seems to embody our own missing half, who is strong where we are soft, or free where we are bound, or tender where we are hard. And this can be beautiful, but it can also be a kind of trap, for we are really longing for a part of ourselves, and no other person can permanently supply what we have failed to grow within. The deeper task, Jung believed, was to develop the inner opposite in ourselves. For the person who has lived only through strength, to cultivate their tenderness, their feeling, their capacity to receive. For the person who has lived only through gentleness, to cultivate their strength, their will, their capacity to stand alone. This is not a betrayal of who we are, it is a completion of who we are. It is the growing of the missing half, so that we become, over time, a whole person, containing both sides of our nature, no longer desperately seeking our missing part in someone else, but carrying it within. There is a quiet maturity in this, and a quiet freedom. So much of the ache we carry, especially in relationships, is the ache of the unlived half of ourselves, projected outward, longing to be completed from outside. And Jung's gentle suggestion is that the completion we seek is, in the end, an inner one. To become whole is to marry within yourself the two halves of your own nature, the outward and the inward, the strong and the soft, the one you lived and the one you left waiting. And in that inner union there is a peace that no outer relationship, however good, can fully provide. You do not have to develop anything tonight. It is enough to feel as you drift that you are already more complete than you know, that the qualities you admire and long for in others live in seed form within you too, waiting to be grown in their own time. You are not half a person seeking your other half out in the world. You are a whole person, with both halves already inside you, one lived and one waiting, and both safe and both yours. Rest in that quiet wholeness. It is already gently coming together in the dark. Sleep, Chapter 24. The softer voice you silenced. Let us rest a little longer with the idea of the unlived half. Because for many people who have spent a lifetime being strong, being capable, being the one who holds everything together, there is a particular voice that was silenced long ago, and it is a tender thing to let it be heard, even softly, in the dark. It is the voice of the softer self, the part that feels deeply, that longs, that needs, that wishes to be cared for rather than always caring. In a life built on strength and self-sufficiency, this voice is often the first to be pushed into the shadow, dismissed as weakness, as something to be overcome. Jung saw the cost of this silencing. He saw strong, accomplished people, admired by everyone for their competence, who had grown quietly parched inside, cut off from their own tenderness, their own capacity to feel and to be moved, their own permission to need. They had become so good at being strong that they had forgotten how to be soft, even with themselves. And this hardness, though it looked like strength, was actually a kind of impoverishment, a whole dimension of life walled off. The unlived tenderness did not make them stronger, it made them smaller and lonelier and more tired than they could say. The healing, Jung believed, was to let the silenced voice speak again, gently, without shame, to give the softer self a place at the table, to allow yourself sometimes to feel deeply, to be moved, to need, to receive care rather than only give it, to be held rather than only holding. This is not a weakening of your strength, it is a completing of it. The strongest people, in the truest sense, are not those who have banished their softness, but those who have room for both, who can be strong when strength is needed and tender when tenderness is called for, who are whole. And there may be no gentler place to let that silenced voice be heard than here, at the end of the day, alone in the dark where there is no one to perform strength for. Here you are allowed to be soft. You are allowed to be tired, to be tender with yourself, to feel whatever you feel, to need rest and to receive it. You do not have to hold anything together right now. You do not have to be strong for anyone, not even for yourself. You can let the capable, holding self set down its burden, and let the softer self, so long silenced, simply be present and be cared for. So let that softer voice be heard tonight, if only in the quiet permission to rest completely. Let yourself be, for these hours, someone who does not have to be strong, who is allowed to be held by the night, to be tender with their own tired heart, to need nothing more than to sleep and to be at peace. That softness is not weakness. It is the other half of your wholeness, coming home. Let it come home now. Let yourself be gentle with yourself, at last, in the dark, and rest. Sleep. Chapter 25. The Self. The wholeness you were born toward. At the center of Jung's whole vision stands an idea he found difficult to name, and he chose in the end a simple and confusing word for it. He called it the Self, with a capital letter, to distinguish it from the small, everyday self we call I. By the self, Jung meant something larger than the conscious ego, something that includes both the daylight self and the whole hidden depth, the shadow and the unconscious, and all of it gathered into a single whole. The self, in his sense, is the totality of who you are, and also the quiet center that holds it all together, the deep organizing principle of the entire psyche. And here is the beautiful part. Jung believed that the self is not something we have to build or achieve. It is already there, from the beginning, whole and complete, at the center of us. The little ego, the I we normally identify with, is only a small part of it, a fragment that has, over the years, mistaken itself for the whole. The great journey of a life, in Jung's view, is not the creation of the self, but the slow discovery of it, the gradual realization of a wholeness that was always already present, waiting beneath the surface of our partial and divided daily selves. This changes the entire meaning of the inner journey. It is not, at bottom, a project of self-improvement, a matter of adding qualities we lack or fixing what is broken. It is more like a remembering, a homecoming, a slow return to a wholeness we were born with and lost sight of along the way. Everything we have spoken of tonight, facing the shadow, reclaiming the exiled parts, developing the unlived half, all of it is really this single movement, the movement of the small self relaxing its grip and being taken up into the larger self that was there all along. Becoming whole is not becoming something new. It is becoming, at last, what you already are. There is profound rest in this idea, especially for anyone tired of the endless project of self-improvement, the exhausting sense that they must always be fixing themselves, adding to themselves, becoming better. Jung's vision offers something gentler and truer. You are not a broken thing to be repaired. You are a whole thing that has forgotten its own wholeness. The center is already there, sound and complete beneath all the surface trouble. And the deepest movement of your life is not away from what you are, but toward it, a slow settling into the wholeness that has been quietly holding you together the whole time. So tonight, you do not have to improve or fix or add anything to yourself at all. You can simply let the small, tired, striving self relax and sink toward the deep center that is already whole, already at peace, already home. It asks nothing of you but that you stop for a while trying to be more than you are and rest in what you already wholly are. That center is holding you now in the dark, as it always has. Let yourself settle down into it. Let the wholeness you were born toward receive you. And sleep. Chapter 26. Not perfect, but whole. Jung drew a distinction that may be one of the most freeing things a tired and self-critical person can ever hear. He distinguished sharply between being perfect and being whole. And he came to believe that the drive toward perfection, so admired in our world, is actually one of the great enemies of a real and peaceful life. Because perfection, by its nature, requires the exclusion of everything that does not fit, the constant pushing away of the flawed, the dark, the messy, the merely human. And that pushing away is precisely what creates and feeds the shadow. The pursuit of perfection is the pursuit of a half-self, polished and partial, at war with everything it has had to exclude. Wholeness is something entirely different and much kinder. Wholeness does not require you to be flawless. It requires you to be complete, to include all of yourself, the light and the dark, the strong and the weak, the admirable and the ashamed. A whole person is not one who has eliminated their faults, but one who has made room for their whole nature, who has stopped waging war against the parts of themselves that fall short of some impossible ideal. Wholeness embraces the shadow rather than banishing it. It is not clean, it is not perfect, but it is real, and it is at peace in a way the perfectionist can never be. Jung came to prize this wholeness over any striving for goodness or perfection. He saw that the endless effort to be only good, only right, only admirable left people exhausted, brittle, and secretly tormented by everything in themselves that did not measure up. Whereas the willingness to be whole, to accept the full mixed reality of oneself, brought a deep and durable peace. It is a strange and liberating turn. The path to inner peace runs not through becoming better and better, but through becoming more and more complete, more and more accepting of the whole of what you already are. For anyone who has spent a life driven by high standards, holding themselves relentlessly to account, never quite satisfied, this is a message worth letting sink deep. You do not have to be perfect to be at peace. In fact, the striving for perfection is itself the obstacle to the peace you seek. What you long for is not a flawless self, which is impossible and would in any case be only half of you. What you long for is wholeness, the quiet acceptance of your entire imperfect human reality. And that is not only possible, it is available the moment you stop demanding perfection and allow yourself instead to be whole. So set down, tonight, the exhausting standard of perfection. You do not have to have been good enough today. You do not have to be flawless to deserve rest. You are allowed to be a whole, imperfect, complete human being and to lie here in the dark exactly as you are, unfixed and unpolished and entirely worthy of peace. Let the demand for perfection dissolve. Let wholeness, which asks nothing but acceptance, take its place. And in that acceptance, rest, sleep. Rest, chapter 27. Individuation, becoming who you already are. Jung had a word for the whole lifelong process we have been circling tonight, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the shadow, of settling into the self. He called it individuation. It is a large word for a natural thing. It means simply the process by which a person becomes who they truly and fully are, distinct and complete, no longer merely a copy of what others expected, no longer identified only with their persona, but their own whole self realized. Individuation is the quiet task of a lifetime, and especially, Jung believed, of its second half. He was careful to say that individuation is not selfishness, not a turning away from others into self-absorption. In fact, he believed the opposite. The person who becomes truly whole, who has reconciled with their own depths, becomes more genuinely available to others, not less, because they are no longer projecting their shadow onto everyone, no longer using relationships to complete a self they have failed to complete within. Individuation frees us to meet others as they really are, because we are no longer unconsciously demanding that they carry our missing parts. To become whole is, paradoxically, to become more capable of real connection. Nor is individuation a destination that can be finally reached and checked off. It is a direction, a lifelong movement, never fully completed, always unfolding. There is no moment when a person becomes perfectly whole and is done. There is only the ongoing process, the continual turning toward greater completeness, greater honesty, greater integration of all that we are. And Jung found this deeply reassuring rather than discouraging. It meant that there was always more life to be lived, always more of oneself to be discovered and reclaimed, always a deepening available, right up to the very end. The journey toward wholeness does not run out. This is a hopeful thing to hold, especially in the latter half of a life when the outward story may feel largely written. Jung insisted that the most important journey, the journey inward toward wholeness, is only truly beginning then. The individuation of the second half of life is where the real depth is found, where a person finally becomes themselves in full, gathers what they scattered, reconciles with their shadow, and settles into the quiet completeness of the self. It is not a decline, it is the deepest ascent, disguised as an evening. You do not have to individuate tonight. It is the slow work of years, and it asks nothing of you in this dark hour but to know that it is underway, that you are, even now, in the midst of becoming who you most truly are, and that this becoming does not end but deepens all the way through. There is no rush. There is no deadline. There is only the long, unfolding, lifelong homecoming to yourself, and tonight is simply one more quiet night within it. Rest in the journey. You are exactly where you are meant to be on it. Sleep, Chapter 28. The second half of life. Jung gave particular attention to the second half of life, and much of his wisdom speaks directly to anyone who has passed the midpoint and feels the ground of their existence quietly shifting. He observed that the first half of life and the second half have fundamentally different tasks, and that much unhappiness comes from trying to live the second half by the rules of the first. The young person's task is outward, to build a self, to establish a place in the world, to achieve, to acquire, to become someone. And that is right and necessary. But at some point, the outward task is largely done, and a new and different task begins. The task of the second half, Jung believed, is inward. It is no longer about building the persona, but about discovering what lies beneath it. No longer about acquiring, but about deepening. No longer about becoming someone in the eyes of the world, but about becoming whole in the truth of oneself. The energy that once went outward into ambition and achievement is meant in the second half to turn inward, toward meaning, toward integration, toward the reclaiming of the shadow and the settling into the self. This turning is not a loss of vitality, it is a redirection of it toward the deepest work of all. And Jung saw clearly what happens when a person refuses this turn. When someone tries to go on living the second half of life by the values of the first, endlessly chasing the outward markers, clinging to youth, achievement, and acquisition long past their season, they grow, he said, strangely hollow and increasingly anxious, because they are pouring energy into a task that is already complete, while neglecting the new task that is quietly asking to begin. The restlessness and emptiness that can descend in the middle years is often exactly this: the outward game won and yet unsatisfying, the inward journey not yet begun. But for those who accept the turn, who let the energy move inward, the second half of life becomes something rich and deep, in many ways more rewarding than the first. There is a settling, a deepening, a coming into one's own that only time can bring, the reclaiming of the shadow, the reconciling of the opposites, the slow, quiet becoming whole. Jung saw people grow more themselves, more peaceful, more genuinely alive in their later years than they had ever been in their striving youth. The evening of life, lived rightly, has its own particular light, warmer and more golden than the harsh brightness of noon. So if you have felt in the quiet hours that the game you spent your youth playing has lost its savor, hear that not as an ending, but as an invitation. The first task is done, and done well enough. A new and deeper task is beginning, the task of becoming whole, and it is the best work of a life. There is nothing to mourn in the passing of the first half. There is only the deeper journey now opening before you. And tonight, you can rest in the knowledge that your best and deepest becoming may still be ahead, unfolding quietly, even now, in the dark sleep. Chapter 29. The Afternoon of Life. Jung had a lovely image for this great turning, and it is a peaceful one to rest in. He compared the course of a human life to the passage of the sun across the sky. In the morning, the sun climbs, gathering strength, rising toward its height, casting its light ever wider. This is the first half of life, the ascent, the building, the expansion into the world. And at midday, the sun reaches its zenith, the peak of its outward power. But then, Jung noted, something changes. The sun does not go on climbing forever. It begins, slowly, to descend. And the afternoon light, though it comes from the same sun, has a wholly different quality from the light of morning. The morning light is bright, energetic, outward-reaching, but the afternoon light is golden, softer, longer, more beautiful in its way. It falls at a gentler angle. It reveals things the harsh noon light flattened. It carries a warmth and a depth that the climbing morning sun never had. And Jung's point was that the afternoon of life, though it is a descent in the outward sense, is not therefore a diminishment. It has its own light, its own beauty, its own gifts, which are simply different from those of the morning, and, in many ways, richer. The mistake, Jung said, is to try to live the afternoon as though it were still morning, to keep striving upward when the natural movement has turned, to cling to the bright, hard light of noon and refuse the golden light of the descending sun. This refusal makes people anxious and brittle, forever fighting a movement that cannot be stopped. But those who accept the afternoon, who let the light change, who turn from climbing to deepening, discover the particular richness that only the later light can give. The long, golden warmth, the softened, revealing angle, the beauty that noon was too bright to show. There is deep consolation in this image for anyone who feels the sun of their own life beginning, quietly, to descend. It is not a tragedy. It is the natural and beautiful course of things, and the descending light has its own gifts to give, gifts unavailable in the climbing morning, the deepening, the wholeness, the mellowed wisdom, the capacity to see in the gentler light what the harsh noon obscured. To accept the afternoon is not to give up. It is to receive a beauty that only comes later, and that could come no other way. So let yourself rest tonight in the golden light of your own life's afternoon, whatever hour you have reached. There is no need to keep straining toward a noon that has passed or is passing. The descending sun is not your enemy. Its light is warmer, kinder, deeper than the light you climb through. And as the day of your life moves gently toward its evening, you can let yourself be held in that golden warmth, unhurried, unafraid, receiving the particular grace of the later light. Rest in the afternoon. It is beautiful. And Sleep, Chapter 30, when achievement stops being enough. There comes a moment for many people who have lived successful and productive lives when achievement quietly stops being enough. The promotions, the acquisitions, the markers of success that once brought such satisfaction begin to feel strangely empty. A person reaches the goals they spent years pursuing and finds, to their confusion and sometimes their shame, that the arrival does not bring the fulfillment they expected. And they wonder, in the quiet hours, what is wrong with them, that they should have so much and feel so little. Jung understood this experience deeply, and he did not see it as a sign that something was wrong. He saw it as a sign that something was right, that a person had reached the natural end of the first half of life's task and was being called, whether they understood it or not, toward the second. The emptiness of achievement is not a malfunction, it is a message. It is the psyche's way of saying that the outward journey has gone as far as it can go, and that the time has come to turn inward toward the deeper sources of meaning that no achievement can provide. Because meaning, Jung believed, does not finally come from what we accumulate or accomplish. Those things have their place and their satisfactions, but they are the satisfactions of the morning, and they do not nourish the afternoon soul. The deeper meaning comes from wholeness, from the integration of the self, from the reconciliation with one's own depths, from becoming, at last, who one truly is. And this is precisely what achievement cannot buy, and what the endless pursuit of more will never yield. The person chasing the next accomplishment to fill the emptiness is looking for water in a place where there is only sand. So when achievement stops being enough, the answer is not more achievement, not a bigger goal, not a harder push. The answer is a turning, a redirection of the search, from the outer world to the inner one, from having and doing to being and becoming whole. Jung saw that those who made this turn found the meaning they had been missing, not out there in some final accomplishment, but in here, in the slow, deep work of coming home to themselves. The emptiness was never a sign of failure. It was a doorway, and it opened inward. If you have known that particular emptiness, the strange hollowness at the heart of success, let it be, tonight, not a source of shame but a quiet signpost, pointing you gently toward the deeper journey that is yours to take. You have not failed. You have simply finished one kind of search and are being invited into another, richer one. And there is nothing to pursue tonight, nothing to achieve, nothing to add. Tonight you can simply rest in the being that underlies all the doing, the quiet wholeness that was the thing you were really looking for all along. It asks nothing of you now but rest, sleep. Chapter 31. Turning inward without fear. The turn inward that Jung described, from the outer journey of the first half of life to the inner journey of the second, can be frightening, and it is worth acknowledging that fear gently so that it can soften. We are, most of us, far more comfortable in the outer world than the inner one. The outer world is known, manageable, full of tasks we understand how to do. The inner world, the world of the depths, the shadow, the unconscious, is unfamiliar and dark. And we have often spent a lifetime carefully not looking at it. To turn toward it can feel like stepping off solid ground into deep water, but Jung offered great reassurance to those making this turn. The inner depths, he insisted, are not finally hostile. Yes, there are difficult things down there, the shadow, the old wounds, the parts we exiled. But there is also, and more fundamentally, the deep wisdom of the self, the natural movement toward wholeness, the inner physician always working on our behalf. The unconscious is not out to destroy us. In its deepest nature, it is oriented toward our healing, toward the restoration of the wholeness we have lost. To turn inward is not to enter enemy territory. It is to come, at last, into fuller possession of our own home. And the turn does not have to be made all at once in some overwhelming plunge. Jung understood that it happens gradually, gently, in small movements of honesty and attention over years. A dream noticed and pondered. A projection recognized and taken back. A shadow trait acknowledged and made room for. A quiet hour of reflection allowed instead of filled with distraction. The inward journey is made in small steps, each one manageable, each one deepening the acquaintance with oneself, until, slowly, the inner world becomes not a place of dread, but a place of familiarity, even of refuge. There is, in fact, a profound peace waiting in the inner world once the initial fear is past. The person who has made friends with their own depths is no longer at the mercy of them. They are no longer haunted by what they refuse to see, no longer driven by forces they will not acknowledge. They have come home to themselves, and there is a deep steadiness in that, a groundedness that the outer world, with all its changes and uncertainties, can never provide. The inner journey, feared at the outset, becomes in the end the source of the truest security. You do not have to make any turn tonight, but you can let the fear of your own inner depths soften, just a little, as you drift towards sleep. There is nothing in you that is finally against you. The depths that receive you each night in sleep are the same depths that hold, beneath all the trouble, your own wholeness and your own healing. You can trust them. You have always, every night, entrusted yourself to them, and every morning they have returned you, renewed. Let yourself sink toward them now, without fear, into the deep and kindly inner sea that is, in the end, your truest home. Rest. Sleep. Chapter 32. The Wounded Healer. There is an old idea, one that Jung took up and made his own, that speaks with particular tenderness to anyone who has suffered, which is to say, to everyone. It is the idea of the wounded healer. In the old myths, the one who heals others is often themselves wounded, carrying an injury that never fully closes. And Jung saw in this a deep psychological truth. It is often precisely through our own wounds, our own suffering, our own descents into darkness, that we gain the capacity to understand and to help others, and, more importantly, to heal ourselves. The wound is not only a site of pain, it is potentially a source of depth, of compassion, of wisdom. Jung believed that our wounds, faced and integrated, become the very source of our gifts. The person who has suffered loss and moved through it becomes able to sit with others in their grief in a way the untouched never could. The one who has descended into their own darkness and returned carries a light that only that descent could have kindled. This is not to romanticize suffering, which is real and often terrible, and Jung never made light of it. It is only to say that suffering, when it is not merely endured but faced and worked through, is not wasted. It becomes part of the raw material of wholeness. The wound becomes the place where the light gets in, and, later, the place from which it shines. This gives a different meaning to the difficult passages of a life. The hard times, the losses, the descents, the wounds we would never have chosen are not simply damage to be regretted. They are, potentially, the very experiences that deepen us, that break open the too small self and make room for something larger, that give us the compassion and the wisdom we could have gained no other way. Jung saw that the people of real depth, the ones others instinctively turned to, were almost always people who had suffered and had done the inner work of integrating their suffering. Their wounds had become their wisdom. And there is a particular consolation in this for the reckoning that sometimes comes in the quiet hours. The reckoning with our own scars, our own histories of pain. Those wounds were not meaningless. They were not simply things that happened to you and left you damaged. Faced and integrated, they have become part of who you are, part of your depth, part of your capacity to understand and to feel and to be present to others and to yourself. The very things that hurt you most may be the things that made you most human, most compassionate, most whole. You do not have to make sense of your wounds tonight. It is enough to know, as you rest, that they are not wasted, that they are woven into the whole of who you have become, that even the hardest passages of your life have deepened you in ways you may not fully see. You are not damaged goods. You are a wounded healer, like all the deepest souls, carrying your scars as part of your wholeness. Let them rest tonight, honored and integrated, no longer aching to be understood, simply part of the whole and worthy person you are. And let that whole person, scars and all, sink gently into sleep. Rest. Chapter 33. What your suffering was preparing. Let us stay a little longer with the meaning of our difficult passages, because Jung believed something quietly radical about them, something that can ease the weight we carry from the past. He believed that the crises of a life, the breakdowns, the losses, the times when everything seemed to fall apart, were very often, in the deeper view, not simply catastrophes but transitions. That what looked, from inside the pain, like pure destruction, was frequently the necessary breaking down of an old and too small self to make room for a larger one. The caterpillar, he might have said, does not experience its dissolution as growth, but it is. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly. A person's carefully built life would collapse through loss or failure or a crisis of meaning, and they would come to him in despair, certain that everything was ruined. And often, looking back later, that very collapse turned out to have been the beginning of their deepest growth. The old structure had to break for the new one to form. The persona had to crack for the fuller self to emerge. The comfortable, partial life had to fall apart for the whole, real life to begin. What felt like an ending was, in the deeper pattern, a difficult and painful birth. This is not to say that all suffering is secretly good, or that we should welcome catastrophe, or that every loss has a hidden gift that makes the pain worthwhile. Jung was too honest for such easy comfort, and some wounds simply wound. But he did believe, and he had seen, that even the hardest passages can be worked with, can be turned, over time, into occasions of deepening rather than mere damage. That the meaning of a suffering is not fixed at the moment it happens, but is made, slowly, by what we do with it afterward, by whether we let it break us down into bitterness or break us open into depth. There is a quiet agency in this that is worth holding. You cannot always choose what happens to you, but you retain always, some say, in what you make of it, in whether your wounds become walls or doorways, whether your losses close you down or open you up. And looking back over your own life, you may be able to see, even now, how some of your hardest passages prepared you, shaped you, deepened you into the person you have become, in ways that no easy road ever could have. What felt like being torn apart was, in some measure, being remade. You do not have to reckon with any of this tonight. It is enough to rest in the gentle possibility that your suffering was not simply waste, that the hard passages of your life were, in the deeper pattern, preparing you for a wholeness you could not have reached any other way. Whatever you have been through, it is part of the whole of you now, woven in, not merely as damage, but as depth. Let the old sufferings rest, honored and transformed, no longer raw, and let the person they help to make, the deeper and wiser person you have become, sink gently into sleep. Rest. Chapter 34. The Symbols that Guide Us. Jung believed that the deeper self speaks not in the plain language of the reasoning mind, but in the older, richer language of symbols. A symbol, for Jung, was not merely a sign that stands for something else, the way a word stands for a thing. It was something more alive than that, an image charged with meaning that could not be fully captured in words, that pointed toward depths the intellect alone could never reach. The great symbols, he believed, the ones that recur across all human cultures, are the natural language of the soul, the way the deep self communicates what cannot be said directly. This is why, Jung thought, human beings have always been drawn to symbols and images and stories, and why a life stripped entirely of them grows arid and thin. The reasoning mind, for all its power, cannot nourish the whole soul. There are dimensions of human experience, the experience of meaning, of the sacred, of depth, of wholeness, that can only be approached through image and symbol, through the language of the deeper self. When we lose touch with that language, dismissing it as primitive or unscientific, we lose access to a whole realm of nourishment and guidance that the soul requires. Jung found that the symbols which spontaneously arise in us, in dreams, in imagination, in the images we are inexplicably drawn to, often carry exactly the guidance we need. The deeper self, working toward our wholeness, sends up images to show us the way, to point toward what we are neglecting, to hold before us the shape of the wholeness we are moving toward. A recurring image in a dream, a story that moves us beyond all reason, a symbol that seems to shimmer with a meaning we cannot quite grasp. These are not idle things. They are the guidance of the deep self, offered in its native tongue. There is something restful in this for the mind that has spent all day in the flat language of tasks and facts and plans, because it means there is another language, an older and deeper one, that does not require effort or analysis, that speaks to us in the images that rise on their own, especially as we approach sleep and the deep self comes near. You do not have to understand these images with your reasoning mind. You only have to let them come, to let yourself be moved by them, to trust that they carry a wisdom your daylight self cannot manufacture. So as you drift toward sleep and the dreaming, let the reasoning mind release its grip and let the older language begin to speak. Whatever images rise, let them come, unanalyzed, unjudged, trusting that they arise from the part of you that is working toward your wholeness. You are entering now the realm where the deep self speaks, the realm of symbol and image and dream, and it is a realm of guidance and healing, not of danger. Let it receive you. Let the symbols rise around you like quiet lights in the dark, guiding you gently down into sleep. Rest. Chapter 35. Synchronicity. The meaningful coincidence. Late in his life, Jung became fascinated by a certain kind of experience that most of us have had, but few of us know what to make of. It is the experience of a meaningful coincidence, a moment when an inner state and an outer event come together in a way that seems too apt, too fitting to be mere chance. You think of an old friend you have not seen in years, and that very day a letter arrives from them. You are wrestling with a question, and the answer appears, unbidden, in a book you happen to open or a stranger's overheard words. Jung gave this a name. He called it synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence that cannot be explained by ordinary cause and effect. Jung was careful and did not claim to fully understand these experiences, nor did he offer them as proof of anything supernatural, but he took them seriously where others dismissed them, because he had encountered too many of them in his own life and in the lives of those he worked with, to wave them all away as meaningless accident. He came to suspect that there might be, woven into the fabric of things, a dimension of meaning as well as a dimension of cause, that the world was not only a machine of causes and effects, but also somehow a web of meanings in which inner and outer could correspond in ways we do not understand. Whatever the truth of it, Jung's openness to synchronicity points toward something valuable, a stance toward life that is receptive to meaning, alert to the possibility that our lives are not merely random, that there may be more connection between the inner and outer worlds than the purely mechanical view allows. This is not superstition. It is a kind of humility, an acknowledgement that we do not fully understand the world or the mind, and that there may be depths of connection and meaning that our current knowledge cannot yet map. It is a willingness to remain open to wonder, and there is a quiet comfort in that openness, a comfort worth carrying into the night. It is the comfort of a universe that might not be as cold and random as it sometimes seems, in which your inner life and the outer world might be more deeply connected than you know, in which meaning might be woven more thoroughly into things than the daylight mind allows. Jung did not ask us to believe anything on faith. He only asked us to stay open, to notice, to not close ourselves off out of a narrow certainty from the possibility of a deeper order. You do not have to decide anything about this tonight. It is enough to let yourself rest in a gentle openness, in the possibility that the world holds more meaning and more connection than we can prove, that your life is woven into something larger in ways you may only glimpse. That openness is itself restful, a release of the need to have everything explained and controlled. Let the universe be a little more mysterious than you can master tonight, and let that mystery be a comfort rather than a threat. Rest in the quiet possibility of meaning and sleep. Chapter 36. The instinct for something greater. Jung observed, across all his years and all the many people he listened to, that human beings seem to carry within them a deep instinct for something greater than themselves, a longing for meaning, for connection to a larger whole, for what he approached in a purely psychological way as the religious function of the soul. He was not speaking necessarily of any particular belief or doctrine. He was speaking of something he saw as a natural part of the human psyche, an inbuilt orientation toward the transcendent, toward wholeness, toward a meaning larger than the individual ego. And he found that when this instinct was denied or neglected, the soul suffered. Jung noticed that many of the people who came to him in the second half of life, struggling with emptiness and loss of meaning, were suffering, at bottom, from a starvation of this deeper instinct. They had built successful outer lives, but they had lost connection to anything larger than themselves, to any sense of meaning that transcended their own small concerns. And this loss, he believed, was at the root of much modern unhappiness. The soul has a need for meaning as real as the body's need for food, and a life that feeds only the ego and never the deeper longing for connection to a greater whole, leaves that longing to ache in the dark. He did not prescribe any particular answer to this longing, respecting that each person must find their own way. But he insisted on taking the longing itself seriously, as a genuine and important part of human nature, not to be dismissed or explained away. Whether it was met through traditional faith, or through a personal sense of the sacred, or through connection to nature, or art, or love, or the deep work of individuation itself, the important thing was that the longing be honored, that the soul's need for meaning and for connection to something greater be acknowledged and fed. There is something quietly steadying in this recognition, especially in the hours when the great questions come near, that the longing you may feel for meaning, for connection to something larger, for a significance beyond your own small self, is not a weakness or an illusion to be outgrown. It is a real and natural part of being human, as old as the species, as deep as the soul. You are not foolish for feeling it, you are human. And the feeling itself is pointing you towards something your soul genuinely needs, and can, in its own way and time, find. You do not have to answer the great longing tonight. It is enough to honor it, to let it be present without rushing to resolve it, to feel yourself as a creature naturally oriented toward meaning and toward the larger whole, resting now within a universe vast beyond understanding. Whatever the greater thing is that your soul reaches toward, you are held within it even now, even in the dark, even without understanding it. Let that quiet sense of being held by something larger carry you. You are a small and cherished part of an immense whole, and it is holding you gently as you fall towards sleep. Rest. Chapter 37. Holding the opposites together. One of Jung's deepest teachings, and one of the most useful for a peaceful life, concerns the opposites. He observed that the psyche is full of opposing forces, light and dark, strength and weakness, the desire to connect and the desire to be alone, the part that wants one thing and the part that wants another. And he noticed that we are forever trying to resolve these tensions by choosing one side and rejecting the other, by being only strong, only good, only independent, only kind. But this resolution by rejection, he saw, is precisely what creates the shadow and divides the self. The deeper and harder path is to hold the opposites together, to contain both sides without collapsing into either. This is difficult, because the mind hates tension and craves resolution. When we feel two opposing pulls within us, the discomfort is real, and the temptation is to end it quickly by picking a side and disowning the other. But Jung believed that the most important growth happens precisely in the willingness to hold the tension, to contain both opposites at once, to resist the premature resolution, and stay in the uncomfortable middle where both truths are allowed. He believed that if a person could hold the tension of the opposites long enough without collapsing to one side, something new could emerge, a third thing, a reconciliation that transcended and included both. He called this emergence the transcendent function, a rather grand name for a simple and profound experience. When you hold two opposing truths together without forcing a resolution, when you contain the tension patiently, a new possibility eventually arises, one you could not have reached by simply choosing sides. The person torn between two paths, who holds the tension rather than leaping, finds a third way open. The one caught between opposing feelings, who contains both, finds them slowly transform into a deeper understanding. Wholeness, Jung believed, is born not from resolving our contradictions, but from holding them until they yield something larger. There is a mature and restful wisdom in this, especially for anyone lying awake, torn by some inner conflict. The message is not that you must resolve it tonight, must decide, must pick a side and end the discomfort. The message is the opposite. It is that you can hold the tension, can contain both sides, can let the conflict rest unresolved within you, trusting that in its own time something new will emerge, a reconciliation you cannot yet see. You do not have to collapse the opposites tonight. You only have to hold them gently and wait. And holding, unlike resolving, can be done at rest. So, let whatever opposing pulls you feel simply coexist tonight. Both allowed, neither forced to win. You do not have to decide. You do not have to end the tension. You can let both truths lie down together in you, held in a patient and spacious quiet, while the deeper self does its slow work of reconciliation in the dark. There is nothing to resolve before morning. There is only the holding, the patient, restful holding, and then sleep. Let both sides rest. Let yourself rest. Sleep. Chapter 38. The tension that becomes peace. Let us rest a little longer in this idea of holding the opposites, because it points toward a peace of a particular and durable kind. A peace not of having resolved everything, but of being able to contain what remains unresolved. Most of us imagine that peace will come when all our conflicts are settled, all our questions answered, all our tensions relieved. And so we chase resolution endlessly, believing that peace lies on the far side of it. But Jung's wisdom suggests something different and truer. The deepest peace is not the absence of tension. It is the capacity to hold tension without being torn apart by it. Think of how much of our restlessness comes from the demand that everything be resolved, that every question be answered, every conflict settled, before we can be at ease. It is an exhausting demand and an impossible one, because life is inexhaustibly full of unresolved things, of opposites that will not collapse, of questions that have no final answers. The person who can only be at peace when everything is settled will never be at peace, because everything is never settled. But the person who can hold the unresolved, who can contain the tension of the opposites, who can be at ease in the midst of uncertainty, that person carries their peace with them into any situation, because it does not depend on external resolution. This is a mature peace, the peace of the second half of life, the peace of a soul that has stopped demanding that reality be simpler than it is. It is the peace of being able to say, "I do not know," and rest anyway, of being able to hold two contradictory truths and not be shattered, of being able to live with open questions, unfinished business, unresolved tensions, and still be at ease. Because the ease comes from within, from the capacity to contain, rather than from the impossible achievement of resolving everything. Jung believed this capacity grew as a person became more whole, as they integrated their own opposites, their own light and dark. The person who has made peace with the contradictions within themselves becomes able to make peace with the contradictions of life. The inner reconciliation becomes an outer serenity. And this is a peace that cannot be taken away by circumstances, because it was never dependent on circumstances in the first place. It is the peace of wholeness, the peace of a soul large enough to hold its own tensions and the world's. You do not have to achieve this peace tonight, but you can taste it in the simple act of letting your unresolved things be unresolved just for now and resting anyway. You do not need everything settled to sleep. You do not need every question answered, every tension relieved. You can hold it all gently in a spacious and untroubled quiet and let yourself rest in the midst of the unfinished, because rest was never meant to wait for resolution. Let the tensions be, let the questions be, and let the peace that does not depend on resolving them carry you tonight into sleep. Rest. Chapter 39. Integration, not elimination. As we move toward the deeper quiet of the night, let us gather the heart of everything Jung understood into a single, simple word. That word is integration. The whole of his vision, the shadow, the opposites, the unconscious, the self, individuation, comes down, in the end, to this. Wholeness is achieved not by eliminating the parts of ourselves we do not like, but by integrating them, by bringing them into relationship with the whole, by making room for all of who we are. Not elimination, but integration. Not the victory of one part over the others, but the reconciliation of all the parts into a living whole. This is the great reversal at the center of Jung's thought, and it runs against everything our fear-driven, perfectionist habits tell us. We want to get rid of our flaws, our darkness, our weakness, our shame. We imagine wholeness as a matter of subtraction, of cutting away everything unworthy until only the good remains. And Jung saw that this is exactly backward. The cutting away does not produce wholeness. It produces division, a bright, partial self and a dark, exiled shadow, forever at war. Wholeness comes only through the opposite movement, through inclusion, through gathering back everything we have cast out and finding it a place within the whole. To integrate is not to indulge. This is important. Integrating your anger does not mean acting it out. It means acknowledging it, understanding it, and holding it consciously so that it can be used wisely rather than erupting blindly. Integrating your shadow does not mean becoming your worst impulses. It means knowing them, owning them, and thereby ceasing to be unconsciously ruled by them. Integration is the opposite of both denial and indulgence. It is conscious inclusion, the mature holding of the whole self in awareness, so that all the parts can be in relationship rather than at war. And the fruit of integration is precisely the peace we have been speaking of all night, the peace of a self no longer divided against itself. The person who has integrated their opposites, who has made room for their whole nature, who has ceased the endless war against parts of themselves, arrives at a deep and quiet wholeness, a sense of being all of a piece, at home in themselves, no longer haunted by what they refuse to see. This is not the excitement of achievement. It is something better and more lasting. It is the deep, settled peace of a person who has come home to the whole of who they are. You do not have to integrate anything tonight. The work is slow and lifelong, and it asks nothing of you in this dark hour. But you can rest in its direction, in the knowledge that the path is not one of cutting yourself down, but of gathering yourself whole, not of eliminating, but of including, not of war, but of reconciliation. You are not a problem to be solved by subtraction. You are a wholeness to be gathered, gently, over a lifetime, and tonight you can simply rest as the whole you already are, all your parts allowed, all at peace, held together in the quiet dark. Rest, sleep. Chapter 40. Making friends with the whole of yourself. There is a phrase that captures, simply, the practical heart of Jung's whole vision, and it is a gentle one to hold as the night grows deep. It is the idea of making friends with yourself. Not just the presentable parts, not just the self you are proud of, but the whole of yourself, including the parts you have judged and hidden and been ashamed of. To become, at last, a friend to your own whole being, the way a good friend is, one who sees your flaws clearly and cares for you anyway, who knows the worst of you and stays, who accepts the whole person without demanding that you be other than you are. Most of us, Jung understood, are not friends to ourselves. We are more like harsh critics or stern judges, forever finding fault, forever demanding improvement, forever withholding acceptance until we finally measure up, which we never quite do. We treat ourselves in a way we would never treat someone we loved, with a coldness, a severity, an impatience that we would find cruel if we saw it directed at another. And this inner hostility, this failure to befriend ourselves, is at the root of a great deal of our suffering. A war conducted quietly, relentlessly, against the one person we can never leave. The healing Jung pointed toward was, in the end, a kind of inner friendship, an ending of that war, a turning toward oneself with the acceptance and care we would offer a beloved friend. To meet your own flaws with understanding rather than contempt. To meet your own wounds with tenderness rather than impatience. To meet the whole of yourself, the light and the dark, the strong and the weak, with the steady, accepting warmth of genuine friendship. This is not complacency, not a giving up on growth. It is the very ground from which real growth becomes possible, because we grow far better in an atmosphere of acceptance than in one of contempt. And there may be no better time to practice this inner friendship than now, at the end of the day, alone in the dark. Because so often the quiet hours are when the inner critic is loudest, when we lie awake reviewing our failures, judging ourselves for all the ways we fell short. What if, tonight, you offered yourself the other thing instead? What if you met yourself, the whole tired, imperfect human whole of yourself, with warmth rather than judgment, with the gentle acceptance of a true friend who is simply glad to be with you, exactly as you are? Offer yourself that friendship now. Let the inner critic rest, and let a kinder voice take its place, the voice of a friend who accepts you completely, who is not keeping score, who wants only your peace and your rest. You have carried yourself through another whole day. You have done your best, as everyone does. And now you can be, at last, a friend to yourself, and let that friendship hold you gently with all your flaws and all your wholeness as you sink towards sleep. You are in good company tonight. Your own rest. Chapter 41. The fear of your own depths. As the night grows deep, let us speak gently to the fear itself, the fear that keeps so many people from ever turning toward their own inner life. It is the fear of what we might find if we truly looked, the fear that beneath the surface lies something too dark, too shameful, too overwhelming to face. This fear is very common and very human, and it is worth meeting with kindness rather than dismissing, because it is precisely this fear that keeps the shadow in the dark, that keeps us divided, that keeps us from the wholeness Jung believed was our birthright. But Jung's whole life of listening to the human depths gave him a reassurance to offer this fear, and it is a profound one. He found, over and over, that what people feared to find within themselves was almost never as terrible as the fear itself. The imagination, in its avoidance, makes the hidden self into a monster. But when a person finally, gently turned to look, they found not a monster, but an exile, not a horror, but a wounded and human part of themselves, waiting to be acknowledged. The fear was always larger than the thing it feared. The dread of looking was always worse than what was actually there to see. This is one of the most important things Jung learned, and one of the most freeing. The energy we spend avoiding our own depths, keeping the lid on, refusing to look, is far greater than anything we would actually have to face if we looked. The fear feeds on the darkness of avoidance. Bring even a little light, a little honest attention, and the fear shrinks, because it turns out there was never a monster, only a part of ourselves we had frightened ourselves about by refusing to see it. What is faced grows manageable. Only what is avoided grows monstrous. And so the fear of your own depths, however real it feels, is a fear you can gently begin to set down, not by forcing yourself into some overwhelming confrontation, but simply by softening the avoidance, by allowing the possibility that what lies within you is not a horror, but a human wholeness, wounded in places, dark in places, but fundamentally yours and fundamentally bearable. You are not harboring a monster. You are, like every human being, harboring a whole self, and the whole self, met with kindness, is nothing to fear. You do not have to face anything tonight. It is enough to let the fear itself soften, to let yourself rest in the reassurance that there is nothing in your depths that would not in the end prove bearable and human and yours. The dark you have been afraid of is only the unlit part of your own house, and it is your house, and you are safe in it. Let the fear of your own depths ease, tonight, into a quiet trust. There is no monster in the dark. There is only you, whole and human, safe to rest in your own being at last. Sleep, Chapter 42. What waits on the other side of the fear? Jung believed that on the other side of the fear of our own depths lay something precious, something that could be reached in no other way. Not just relief from the fear, though that alone would be worth much, but a positive treasure, the wholeness and vitality and peace that come from finally being at home in the entirety of oneself. The very thing we most avoid, he found, is often the gateway to the very thing we most need. The descent we dread is the descent that heals. He saw this pattern so often that it became central to his understanding of how a soul grows. There would be some part of the inner life a person could not bear to face, and their avoidance of it would keep them stuck, divided, quietly suffering. And then, often through some crisis that left them no choice, they would finally turn and face it. And on the other side of that facing, they would find not the destruction they had feared, but a new wholeness, a new peace, a new access to their own life and energy. The thing they had spent years fleeing turned out to hold exactly what they had been missing. The treasure, as the old alchemist said, lay in the place they least wanted to look. This gives a deep meaning to the difficult inner passages of a life, the times when we are forced to face what we would rather avoid. Those passages, hard as they are often the doorways to our greatest growth. What waits on the other side of the fear is not more darkness, but a larger and more integrated self, a wholeness that includes what was formerly exiled, a peace that comes from no longer having to run. The people who have made this passage, who have faced their own depths and come through, carry a particular quality, a groundedness, a depth, a quiet wholeness that those who have never made the descent do not possess. And this is a hopeful thing to know, even for those who have not yet made the passage, even for those still standing at the edge of the fear. Because it means that the very thing you may be avoiding, the part of yourself you cannot bear to face, is not your doom, but potentially your liberation. On the other side of that fear waits not annihilation, but a fuller life. The dread is real, but it is guarding a treasure, not a horror. And the passage through it, made gently, in your own time, leads home. You do not have to make any passage tonight. It is enough to rest in the knowledge that your own depths hold not a monster but a treasure, that on the other side of every fear you carry waits a larger wholeness, and that the journey toward it, whenever you are ready, leads not into darkness, but into a deeper light. There is nothing in you to be feared, and everything in you to be reclaimed, in time, gently. But tonight, simply rest, whole and safe, at the edge of the deep, trusting what waits below. Sleep, Chapter 43, Becoming Round. Jung sometimes spoke of the goal of the inner life using the image of roundness, of becoming, over a lifetime, more complete, more rounded, more whole. He was drawn to the circle and to circular images as symbols of the completed self, the psyche that has gathered all its parts into a balanced whole. To become round, in this sense, is not to become perfect or polished, but to become full, to have included all the sides of oneself, to have grown into the complete circle of who one is, rather than remaining a partial arc. Think of how a young person is often all edges and extremes, sharp in their opinions, one-sided in their energies, pushing hard in a single direction. This is natural and right for the first half of life, the time of building and asserting. But as life goes on, if it goes well, something softens and rounds. The extremes moderate. The one-sidedness fills out. The person who was all hard drive develops some gentleness. The person who was all accommodation develops some strength. The sharp, partial self slowly rounds into a fuller, more balanced, more complete human being. This rounding, Jung believed, is the visible sign of a life moving toward wholeness. And there is a particular beauty in this rounding, the beauty we sense in certain older people who have done the inner work, who have grown not rigid and narrow with age, but round and full and deep. They have made peace with their contradictions. They have gathered their scattered parts. They have integrated their shadow. And the result is a kind of completeness, a wholeness that radiates a quiet warmth, that makes them a comfort simply to be near. They have become round in the deepest sense, and their roundness is a kind of gift to everyone around them. This is a beautiful thing to hold as an image of where your own life is tending, especially in its later chapters. Not toward diminishment, not toward a narrowing and hardening, but toward a rounding, a filling out, a growing completeness. The passages you move through, the parts you reclaim, the opposites you reconcile, all of it is slowly rounding you into the full circle of who you are meant to be. You are not shrinking as you age and deepen. You are, in the truest sense, becoming whole, becoming round, becoming complete. You do not have to complete the circle tonight. It is the slow work of a whole life, and it continues gently all the way through. But you can rest in its direction, in the knowledge that you are becoming, over time, more whole, more full, more round, gathering yourself toward a completeness that has its own deep beauty. And tonight, you can simply rest as the growing wholeness you already are. One more quiet night within the long, beautiful rounding of a life. Let yourself be held in that gentle completing. And sleep, chapter 44. The quiet after self-confrontation. There is a particular quiet that comes after a person has faced themselves honestly, and it is one of the deepest pieces available to a human being. It is the quiet that follows the ending of the inner war, the settling that comes when we have stopped fleeing from ourselves, stopped pretending, stopped dividing ourselves into the acceptable and the exiled. Jung knew this quiet well and helped many people reach it, and it is a fitting thing to move toward as the night deepens and we approach the stillness of sleep. Most of our lives are lived with a low, constant inner noise, the noise of self-judgment, self-defense, the endless management of the gap between who we are and who we are pretending to be. It is so constant that we stop noticing it, the way we stop noticing a sound that never ceases. But it costs us, this noise, this perpetual low-grade war with ourselves. And when it finally quiets, when a person has faced themselves honestly enough to stop fighting, the silence that remains is profound. It is the silence of self-acceptance, the deep quiet of a soul no longer at war with itself. This quiet is not the emptiness of avoidance, the false peace of simply not looking. It is the fuller quiet that comes after looking, after facing, after integrating. It is the peace on the far side of honesty, not the fragile peace of denial, and it is far deeper and more durable because it is not threatened by the truth. The person who has faced their shadow is no longer afraid of being found out because they have already found themselves out, and made peace with what they found. There is nothing left to defend, nothing left to hide, and in that there is an enormous and restful freedom. You may have tasted this quiet in moments, after some honest reckoning with yourself, some letting go of a pretense you had been maintaining. There is a lightness that comes, a settling, a sense of finally being able to breathe all the way out. That is the quiet after self-confrontation, and it is available in some measure to anyone willing to stop fighting themselves, willing to accept the whole of who they are. It is, in the end, the peace that all the inner work is for. And you can move toward that quiet now, at the edge of sleep, simply by laying down the inner war, just for tonight. You do not have to defend yourself against yourself in the dark. You do not have to maintain any pretense while you sleep. You can let the whole low noise of self-judgment fall silent and rest in the deep quiet that remains, the quiet of a soul that has, at least for these hours, stopped fighting itself and simply accepts and rests and is at peace. Let that quiet settle over you now. Let the war end for the night, and in the deep silence that remains, sleep. Rest. Chapter 45. Letting the two selves rest as one. We began this night speaking of two selves, the one you show and the one you keep, the daylight self and the stranger in the dark. And we have traveled slowly toward the understanding that these two are not enemies, but halves of a single whole, that the great work of a life is their reconciliation, their integration into one complete person. And now, as the night reaches its deepest hour, we can let that reconciliation happen, not as a task, but simply as a resting, a letting the two selves lie down together, at last, as one. All day the two are kept apart. The daylight self performs, and the hidden self waits. The presentable self holds the stage, and the shadow stays in the wings. And the keeping apart is exhausting, though we rarely name it. The constant low effort of maintaining the division, of being one self while suppressing the other. But now, in the dark, with no one to perform for and nothing to maintain, the division can dissolve. The two selves can come together. The one you show and the one you hide can simply be at the same time in the same quiet as the single whole person you have always been underneath. There is a deep rest in this coming together that no partial rest can match, because when only half of you rests while the other half is held down, the rest is never complete. There is always a part standing guard, a part being suppressed, a tension that never fully releases. But when the two selves are allowed to rest as one, when the whole of you is permitted to be present at once, without division, without suppression, then the rest can be total. The whole person sleeps, not just the acceptable half. And that whole rest is the deepest rest there is. So let the two selves come together now, gently, in the dark. Let the daylight self set down its performance, and let the hidden self come out of the wings, and let them simply be together as one. There is no one here to keep them apart. There is no reason in the dark to maintain the division. You can be for these hours entirely whole, the whole of who you are, present all at once, at peace. The stranger and the familiar, the shown and the hidden, the light and the dark, all of it, one and all of it, resting. Feel how much more completely you can rest when no part of you is being held down. Feel the whole of yourself settling together into a single deep quiet. The two selves reconciled at last, lying down as one. There is nothing left to divide, nothing left to suppress, nothing left to keep apart. There is only the whole of you, together, at peace, in the deep dark, ready to sleep as one complete and undivided person. Let it happen. Let the two rest as one. Sleep. Chapter 46. Nothing left to hide tonight. We are near the end now, and there is a great simplicity to rest in. Whatever you have hidden all your life, from the world and from yourself, there is nothing left to hide tonight. The dark asks nothing of you. It does not need you to be presentable or good or strong or any particular way at all. It simply receives you, the whole of you, exactly as you are, with nothing concealed and nothing performed. And in that complete acceptance, there is the deepest permission to rest. Think of how much energy a life spends in hiding. Hiding the parts we are ashamed of. Hiding the feelings we think are not allowed. Hiding the weakness, the need, the fear, the whole shadow self we have kept in the dark. It is a labor we barely notice, so constant it has become, the labor of concealment, of keeping the hidden self hidden. And here, at the end of the day, in the dark, that labor can finally cease. There is no one to hide from. There is nothing that needs to be concealed. The whole of you can be present, unhidden, unashamed at last. Jung believed that this, in the end, was much of what healing meant. The ceasing of the need to hide. The coming out of the whole self into acceptance. Not into the harsh light of judgment, but into the gentle acceptance of being fully known and fully received, nothing left out, nothing rejected. And there is no gentler place to be fully received than here, in the quiet dark of the night, which takes all of you without condition, which asks you to be nothing but what you are, which receives the hidden and the shown alike into the same soft rest. So let it all come out of hiding tonight into the accepting dark. Whatever you have concealed, whatever you have been ashamed of, whatever part of yourself you have kept in the shadows, let it simply be here now, unhidden and unjudged, received along with all the rest of you into the quiet. There is nothing you must hide to be allowed to rest. There is nothing about you that the dark will not hold. You can be, for these hours, completely and utterly yourself, with nothing concealed, and be completely accepted and completely at rest. Feel the relief of having nothing left to hide. Feel how the whole self, unconcealed, can finally let go. There is no performance required by the night, no concealment, no pretense, no hiding. There is only you, the whole of you, out of the shadows at last, received and accepted and held, exactly as you are, in the gentle and undemanding dark. Nothing left to hide, nothing left to defend. Only the whole of you, at peace, sinking into sleep, rest. Chapter 47. The wholeness that was always there. As we come to the close, let us return to the deepest and most consoling of all Jung's insights, the one that underlies everything else we have touched tonight. It is this: the wholeness we seek was never something we had to create. It was there all along, beneath the divisions of the daylight self, beneath the exile of the shadow, beneath all the fragmentation and the inner war. There has always been, at the center of you, a wholeness, quietly holding everything together, waiting patiently to be discovered. You are not building wholeness from nothing. You are remembering a wholeness that was always, already yours. This is the meaning of Jung's idea of the self, that deep center that was complete from the beginning. All the work of a life, all the facing of the shadow, all the reclaiming and integrating is not the manufacture of something new. It is the slow uncovering of something that was there before we began, the wholeness we were born with and lost sight of, the complete self that has been waiting all this time beneath the surface of our divided lives. And this changes everything about how we hold the journey. It is not a desperate construction. It is a homecoming to what already is. There is such rest in this, especially for the tired and the striving. You do not have to make yourself whole through some heroic effort. You do not have to add the missing pieces or achieve some final integration or get everything right before you can be complete. The wholeness is already there at your center, sound and quiet and waiting. Your only task, and it is the gentle task of a lifetime, is to stop obstructing it, to relax the divisions, to let the parts settle back toward the center that has been holding them all along. And even that task is not for tonight. Tonight you can simply rest in the wholeness that is already there. Because it is there, right now, beneath all your tiredness and all your trouble, the quiet whole center of you, complete and at peace, entirely undisturbed by the surface storms of the day. It has been there through everything, through all the divisions and all the wars, holding steady, waiting. And you can sink toward it now. Let yourself settle down out of the fragmented surface and into the whole deep center, the wholeness that was always there, that is there now, that will be there when you wake. So let yourself come home tonight to the wholeness you never actually lost. Let the tired, divided surface self settle down into the deep, complete center that has been holding you all along. There is nothing to build, nothing to achieve, nothing to make whole. You are already whole, at the center, beneath it all. Rest there now, in the wholeness that was always there, and let it receive you, complete and at peace, into sleep. Rest. Chapter 48. Sleep as the return to the whole. And so we come, gently, to the end, and to sleep itself, which Jung would have understood as far more than a mere switching off. Sleep is the nightly return to the whole. Each night, the small daylight self, with all its divisions and its efforts and its careful separations, loosens its grip and sinks back down into the deep unity from which it came. In sleep, the fragmentation of waking life dissolves. The parts are no longer held apart. The whole self, gathered and undivided, rests in the deep ground of its own being. Sleep is the great reconciler, the nightly homecoming to wholeness. Every night of your life, you have made this return, whether you knew it or not. Every night, the divided self of the day has been received back into the undivided depth, and every morning it has risen again, renewed, reintegrated, made whole once more by its time in the deep. This is one of the quiet mercies built into the very rhythm of being alive, this nightly return to wholeness, this regular dissolving of the day's divisions in the deep waters of sleep. You do not have to do anything to earn it or make it happen. It happens on its own, as natural as breathing, the nightly healing of the whole. And so, the falling asleep you are about to do is not a loss, not a mere ceasing, but a returning to the whole self, the deep center, the undivided ground. You are letting go of the small, effortful, fragmented daylight self and sinking back into the vast and unified depth that is your truest home, the place where all your parts are gathered and at peace, the place from which you will rise again, made whole in the morning. There is nothing to fear in this letting go. It is the most natural and healing thing you do. It is coming home. So let yourself return now. Let the daylight self, with all its divisions, all its performances, all its careful keeping apart, finally loosen and dissolve. Let the shadow and the shown, the strong and the soft, the whole of who you are, sink together into the deep. Let the two selves become one, and the one settle into the undivided ground, and the whole of you be gathered, at last, into the peace of sleep. You are going home to your own wholeness now, as you do every night, received into the deep by the part of you that has always been whole and always will be. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to hide, nothing left to divide, nothing left to solve or to face or to be. There is only the return, the gentle sinking of the whole self into the deep and healing ground, the nightly homecoming to the wholeness that was always there. Let it take you now. Let go completely into the whole. You are safe, you are complete, you are home. Sleep now.